was because it was kind of in the background.
Fallout New Vegas is one of those games where you either love it or you hate it. I don't think there's really an in-between there. If you do love it, it's not a game you can simply play once and put down forever. I personally have played through New Vegas around 27 times on various different consoles, and I still like to come back to it every so often. Those runs can range from heavily modded experiences with new quests, companions, weapons, and mechanics, or more vanilla runs that are only modded for the sake of stability and maybe an EMB shader to breathe a little bit of life into the dated Gamebryo engine. See, New Vegas is a game that has aged incredibly well in some categories and not so much in others, particularly in how the game runs on modern hardware. If you're like me, you may have played these games on consoles during their initial release, a scenario that could lead to its own slew of problems like memory leaks leading to longer loading times and eventual crashes. I'm looking at you, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion on the Xbox 360. Maybe you started on the PC with these games or moved from consoles onto PC for a better, more modular experience. The nice thing about Bethesda games is how easy they are to mod and how interested people are in modding them, leading to a slew of original content and even fixes that the developers may have never thought of. But with PCs comes new upgrades every few years. The PC you had back in 2010 most likely has been completely overhauled in 2021. And with new hardware, drivers, and OSs, etc., certain games become more and more difficult to offer an enjoyable experience out of the box. Bethesda games are one such example of this. New Vegas is fairly unstable on modern hardware and prone to crashes incredibly often. It's thanks to modders that the game is even in a playable state at this point, with guides like Viva New Vegas offering a means of creating an experience that is both vanilla and almost guaranteed to be stable. Even then, you're still not guaranteed to see zero crashes or graphical issues because the Gamebryo engine feels like it's been created using Gorilla Glue, masking tape, and chewing gum. The engine felt like it was on its last legs with the release of New Vegas in 2010, so it's surprising to see it managed to live all the way up to 2015 with the release of Maple Story 2 of all games. The story of New Vegas and its development begins in 2004 when Bethesda bought the rights to publish Fallout 3 specifically, as well as 2 sequels. Keep in mind that this was not a purchase of the entire intellectual property of Fallout as a series, although they would purchase this some 3 years later. Bethesda at the time was potentially best known for the Elder Scrolls series, specifically Oblivion, which was released in 2006. The studio had made a name for themselves in terms of open-world RPGs to the point that they were so influential we began seeing copycat games being developed like Two Worlds in 2007. Although that's up for debate. If you've never played Two Worlds or its sequel, good, don't. If you did, I'm sorry. The games are similar in mechanical concept, but Two Worlds has some of the most uninspired and games being old RPGs to the point that they were so influential we began seeing copycat games being developed like Two Worlds in 2007. Although that's up for debate. If you've never played Two Worlds or its sequel, good, don't. If you did, I'm sorry. The games are similar in mechanical concept, but Two Worlds has some of the most uninspired and unimaginative gameplay to the point that playing it is a chore. I got into the Elder Scrolls series with Oblivion and not Morrowind. I know this is seen as a fatal flaw to some of you watching this, but fear not, I have gone back and played the majority of Morrowind, if only to say I did. While Oblivion was my first foray into the series, there are reasons it remains my favorite. While Morrowind is superior to Oblivion through its many mechanics and open-endedness, Oblivion came with a certain charm and sense of immersion that was able to better hold me throughout the experience. And while the logic and writing within the various quests were not always the best, they were so unique and involved that I found it a requirement to complete every single one. Oblivion didn't just impress me as a kid, it changed my perspective on what video games could be. I was but a baby boy, unaware of what was possible within games, and Oblivion showed me that there was so much more than I ever could have expected. So needless to say, when Fallout 3 was announced, I was at this point very impressed with what Bethesda had to offer. Oblivion had quickly become one of my favorite games at the time, and to hear we would be getting what was essentially Oblivion with guns gave my immature mind a shot of so much serotonin that I had to have it. I was obsessed with playing this game, even though I knew nothing about the Fallout series going into it. And that's another point we should briefly
Huh.
talk about. Fallout 3 is not the same game as Fallout 1 or 2, which are
No.
essentially top-down turn-based RPGs, a genre I would get heavily into much later into my life. And there was a lot of blowback from traditional Fallout fans about the direction the series was going. But this video isn't about that. I didn't, at the time, play Fallout 1 or 2. I've since played 1 at the very least, but the previous entries have never swayed my opinion on 3 onward. When Fallout 3 did release, I was once again in love with what I considered a revolutionary experience at the time. Fallout truly felt, to me, like I was playing Oblivion in a modern setting. Well, as modern as the 1940s to 60s could imagine the future to be. And looking back, a lot of the writing and choices you could make within the game were fairly shallow in design. Sure, there's commentary on your choices. Are you doing good or evil? Or are you somewhere in between? But Fallout 3 had a tough time actually delving into these concepts of what makes something actually be good or not. When you blow up Megaton, there's no real punishment for doing so. No overarching commentary about your actions. If anything, it's played for spectacle. Most players probably blew up Megaton just to see it happen because it was a huge selling point in terms of choices within the game. The only real punishment you run into is hostile NPCs near the blast site, as well as your father giving you a bit of a scolding later on. It's very mild for the essential genocide you just committed. The impact of certain events are not portrayed as important as they should be. This is something New Vegas improves on in a way I'll discuss later, but only slightly. I enjoyed my time with Fallout 3. I even enjoyed my time with its various DLCs despite how shallow they actually were. Operation Anchorage, The Pit, Point Lookout, and Mothership Zeta were all interesting additions to the open world of Fallout 3, even if they were their own instanced areas, and Broken Steel was possibly the first time I've ever seen an ending to a game be remade in order to continue the storyline. Needless to say, I was very happy with Fallout 3 upon release, and played it consistently alongside Oblivion over and over again as DLC released. Once I was informed of New Vegas' development, however, I wasn't jumping for joy by any means. Around the time of Fallout 3 and New Vegas, we were just coming out of an era where games would generally get multiple different versions with the same title across various consoles. You'd see this most in licensed products like Spider-Man or Harry Potter. You could tell that the console or PC release was the main selling point, and all of the other titles were cheap reimaginings at best. And it's understandable why. It's not like the Game Boy Advance could do what the PS2 could. I was of the mind that this was still in practice, that a game would be released and then we may see a spin-off or port, if you can call it that is nothing like the game that preceded it. With New Vegas releasing so close to Fallout 3's end of development, although this was 2 years later, I figured my perception of spin-offs was going to account for this new release. So imagine my surprise when New Vegas releases and I see that it is almost exactly like Fallout 3. Obviously there's a new setting, but the engine and mechanics are almost all one for one at a surface level glance. Add in the ability to use iron sights, better use of skill points within dialogue, and many other minimal features that help lift the RPG experience, and you get a product that looks overall like an improvement on its predecessor. Almost like a true sequel, at least that's how I thought of it at the time. But the development of New Vegas is rife with turmoil, a game not created by Bethesda themselves but outsourced to Obsidian Entertainment, a developer known for their writing staff as well as members who had worked on Fallout 1 and 2, as well as the original concept for 3 titled Van Buren. Everything sounds great on paper, but pressure from Bethesda as well as the gaming market in general would ultimately lead to an unfinished product that still managed to shine brighter than anything Bethesda themselves could have created to this day. Fallout New Vegas is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but one that you get to have over and over again. There's potentially never going to be another game like it, even with rumored sequels up in the air. It's a game that tries to do a lot with a little and manages to succeed for, the most part, while being rough around the edges. Today I'd like to analyze what made the game so good in my eyes, the commentaries it presents, how it presents them, and the overall gameplay experience as a whole. New Vegas is a game of factions. It's a game about war and capitalism, revenge and justice, about the strong using the weak for personal personal gain, and the DLC is so phenomenally strong at expanding upon this that it allows the entire package of New Vegas to feel like one cohesive set of stories. You could consider New Vegas a television show with multiple seasons, followed by sequel films in the form of DLC. New Vegas is open-ended, but it's here to tell a story, one that you get to shape much more than you could in Fallout 3. As I'm writing this, I'm seeing how long this script could potentially be. I imagine this will be one of my longer videos as there's just so much to discuss and go over. So if you love New Vegas or want to learn a lot about it, please feel free to sit back and listen. This is a game that can appear small on the surface, but manages to pack so much within you're prone to finding something new within every playthrough. For that reason, I want to be clear, this retrospective will go over a lot, but not absolutely everything. We'll focus on major aspects of the game, such as the various factions within and how the player can interact with them. We'll look into how the player shapes the story and what these choices can lead to in terms of endings. We'll look at each DLC separately as its own section, as I believe they are unique enough to warrant it. And finally, we'll go over the themes, gameplay, and mechanics throughout. Not necessarily in that order, but you get the idea. If you enjoy videos like this, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, as it helps me continue to make this content. With that out of the way, I'm Super Rad, and this is the big Fallout New Vegas retrospective.
Will you get it over with?
Maybe cons kill people without looking them in the face. But I ain't a fink. Dig? You've made your last delivery, kid. Sorry you got twisted up in this scene. From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Sheesh. So let's get one thing out of the way here. Fallout New Vegas hasn't aged particularly well when it comes to running on modern hardware. For this reason, I'll be using various stability mods in order to make the game perform properly and crash as minimally as possible. To make this happen, I have used the Viva New Vegas mod list and guide to set this up, while skipping all of their gameplay-specific modifications. The goal of this retrospective is to talk about New Vegas as it was on release, and the best way to do this is to keep it as vanilla as possible. In fact, within this list, the only thing I have installed that may lead to visible gameplay changes at all are iStewie AI's tweaks and engine fixes, and things like visual modifications. Even within the tweaks, I have almost all of them disabled. Slightly better lighting and meshes here and there, slightly better animations, and the inclusion of weapons sway while moving. These, in my opinion, add a breath of life to the game without taking away from the core vanilla experience. The Pip-Boy is going to open a little faster for the sake of it. Explosions aren't going to shake my entire camera, but instead just shake the HUD. And things like the HUD have been cleaned up and upscaled to look better on higher resolutions. Weather stays the same, and various additions like being able to sprint or changing the recoil have been left not included. If any of these additions are a problem for you, I apologize. You can think of this retrospective as a look into New Vegas Vanilla Plus if you want, though I do believe the changes to be fairly minimal. This means things like bug fixes are going to be the most prevalent. While it is important to acknowledge that Bethesda games are generally rife with bugs, we've already done so. Bethesda games are hardly future-proofed, and the sandbox environment alongside the Gamebryo engine, for example, can lead to a slew of issues. Oblivion is a key example in this, one that was fixed as best as it could be by modders, and you can find a list of said bugs online. The same can be said for New Vegas. For recording purposes, it'd just be too much trouble to go through all of the game and its DLCs with the countless problems that could arise. So we'll acknowledge that they exist, but we'll also do our best to avoid them for the sake of the video. The opening scene of New Vegas sets the stage for the greater conflict at hand within the Mojave. Years after the bombs fell, the individuals who survived through living in the various vaults surrounding the wasteland emerged to build new societies, villages, and through this various tribes. Tribes especially are a large driving force in terms of New Vegas's narrative. It's interesting that New Vegas uses the term tribes here. Whether it properly fits or not, I'm not completely sure. A tribe is a group of individuals who have over the years adopted a shared culture and ancestry, maybe their own language. This can take generations to develop, and considering the bombs dropped in 2077 and New Vegas begins in 2281, it's not absurd to think this type of social development did happen, especially when many of these communities were first trapped within the vaults. Alongside these tribes came the New California Republic, a union of the American Southwest that is meant to portray American values, including militarism, their views on justice, law, and community, regardless of how these old-school American values may have been flawed, how they believe they are the greater good because a greater evil exists, and if you are not with them, you are against them. The NCR is notorious for collecting communities and absorbing them into the NCR whether they like it or not. Easy Pete is potentially one of the first NPCs you can talk to who points this out. The NCR provides safety and security from tribals and raiders that threaten those within the NCR, but outside of that, it's not so simple. In fact, the NCR has a lot more going on behind the scenes that paints a more nuanced picture of their diplomacy and politics and shows the cracks within. Regardless of what the NCR potentially does wrong, they are the driving force that keeps the Legion at bay. The NCR are potentially meant to be viewed as the good karma faction, but as I mentioned, it's much more nuanced than that. We'll get more into the NCR later, as well as the various tribes, but the Legion, or Kaisar's Legion, are an army situated on the other side of the Colorado River, the two sides being connected by the Hoover Dam, a key point of power that dictates who is within control of the Mojave. The Legion is a conglomerate of 86 tribes that were created through conquest that led to a community of slaves to be used as weapons and fodder for the will of Kaisar and his generals. The Legion wants the dam as the dam is one means of generating a large amount of electricity, and with electricity comes power. With power comes the Mojave. They are the counterpoint to the NCR, the bad karma to the good karma, and it's much less nuanced here despite how Kaisar may lead you to believe through some of his dialogue. The Legion is evil, slavery is evil, and they wish to encroach onto territory that doesn't belong to them in order to spread evil. It's been 4 years since the NCR had to hold the dam against the Legion, in which they were successful at doing but unsuccessful at fully wiping them out. This led to the Legion managing to recoup their losses over time and strengthening their military to the point that they have a strong presence within the Mojave itself, even if they don't fully control it. There's various patrols and camps situated around the desert in which the Legion used to capture slaves, to punish individuals, and much more. The third major faction within New Vegas is Mr. House, a genius individual who predicted the bombs dropping in 2077 and planned for it ahead of time, allowing Vegas to remain relatively unscathed within the main strip of the city. House has used his influence in mind to create a new Vegas, in which has allowed him to rehabilitate various tribes of the Nevada that now all situate themselves within the strip. Not only tribes are on his side, however, House also holds the control over the enigmatic Securitrons, his automated robotic police force that hold a bigger part to play within the grand narrative of New Vegas as a whole. House is the embodiment of capitalism and how power can lead to a monopoly. As strong as the NCR and the Legion can be, they still have to live within House's world. He is what capitalism and a monopoly can ultimately lead to, an authoritarian who keeps out those he does not deem fit to enter his world, and those that do must bow down before him, even if they've never seen him in person before. In this way, we can consider Mr. House to be similar to the Legion. He is an evil that exists within the world of New Vegas. He is the embodiment of capitalism and authoritarianism, creating his own slaves within. People within the strip may live a life of luxury, but they are hardly free, and you'll see that as we progress through the main quest line and various side quests. It's really a pick your poison type of choice in terms of who you wish to side with within New Vegas. The Legion are explicitly evil. They are the villains that are there to allow forces to unite and take them down in the name of all that is good and just. But is House evil as well? Is he some necessary greater good, or is he simply instilling his will through a force that isn't as visible as how the Legion does it? The NCR takes whatever they want, whether you like it or not, because they believe they have the moral high ground to do so. Everyone is corrupted here, some more than others, and you see why this is and hear their excuses as you play throughout the game, ultimately leading to one conclusion that I believe is the best course of action in terms of how you finish it. So who are you within this setting? In Oblivion and Morrowind, you were a prisoner. In Fallout 3, you grew up within a vault. They give you very restrictive narratives that can hinder your overall role-playing experience. New Vegas does this as well, but much less so. In terms of being a prisoner, you have to consider how you got there. Was it just or unjust? Would you even want your character starting in a prison? Could it even possibly make sense for this situation within your personal narrative? Questions like that show how the overall immersion can take a hit slightly within the opening scenes of a Bethesda product. They want to hold your hand within some means, either through the beginning steps of the narrative or through the whole thing. In Morrowind, you're basically free to do as you please the moment you're off the boat. In Oblivion and Fallout 3, you are more on a railway track following a much more present narrative, making it harder to justify straying away from it. Obsidian Entertainment looks to fix that in some capacity. The main thing you know about your character, the only label placed on you is that you are a courier. You are within the Nevada and you have taken up a job. When you exactly started said job doesn't matter. Who you were before that job is completely up to you. Why you took that job is up to you, and after the opening scene, the fact that it was your job doesn't matter at all until a very specific DLC later on. The main narrative of New Vegas opens up with your first introduction to Benny, who is part of one of New Vegas's strip tribes known as the Chairmen. You're also introduced to the Great Khans, a raider tribe who work within drug trafficking, leading to their own assortment of problems. You as a character are tied up within the cemetery just outside the town of Goodsprings. Benny has one of the Great Khans digging your grave while producing a gambling chip from his suit's inner pocket. We'll discuss why you are in this situation later on down the line and the motivations of Benny for capturing you. However, in the present situation, Benny pulls a gun on your character and ultimately shoots you in the head, starting the adventure that is New Vegas. The first major step in terms of gameplay is the character creation process. This is probably the best time to point out that the characters within New Vegas, or really within any open world Bethesda product, are known to have some pretty atrocious faces and textures. Oblivion characters look like an assortment of potatoes, yams, and squashes of various shapes and sizes. Meanwhile, Fallout 3 and New Vegas characters are in a perpetual state of looking like they are melting. There's mods to fix this, and I wouldn't say it's inexcusable that they look so bad. They look good enough in a sense, for the time, regardless of how well or not they have aged, but since this is a vanilla retrospective, it's worth pointing out just how terrible almost every character in this game can and probably will look. Luckily, there's a bit more of an opportunity for you as the character creator to make your character look a little more conventional than the rest of New Vegas's population. Before we even reach the character creation process, we are spammed with various add-on DLC. Many of these DLCs are bonus items that were provided to players who pre-ordered the game from specific stores. These included the Caravan Pack, the Tribal Pack, the Classic Pack, and the Mercenary Pack, and all of these were bundled together later for an optional purchasable add-on known as the Courier's Stash, which was released alongside another item pack known as the Gunrunner's Arsenal. The individual item packs will spawn notification menus for each one immediately as you load into the character creation process. It's a bit grating, but is also a staple of Bethesda design, one that Obsidian didn't seem keen on fixing. Gunrunner's Arsenal gets a notification a bit later on, but just to point out, it's a more in-depth mod than the individual item packs themselves, adding in new unique weapons to find and purchase within the game, as well as an assortment of new modifications for weapons. New Vegas improves the Fallout 3 experience in numerous ways. One of the ways is the inclusion of weapon modifications. Specific modifications can be added to specific guns to offer various various stat boosts and visual changes to the weapon itself. And Gunrunner's Arsenal adds to this with an assortment of new modifications for players to try out. Modifications aren't a game changer by any means, but the added customizability and freedom is a welcome improvement. The player is introduced to Doc Mitchell, the Doctor of Goodsprings, a village within the Mojave. He saved you from a bullet wound in the head after Victor, a Securitron that lives within Goodsprings, ultimately dug you out of a grave in the Goodsprings Cemetery. The narrative here gives good enough reason for why you are setting the stats of your character and customizing your appearance. Surgery was performed on you, a pretty heavy surgery at that, and this could lead to a few visual changes or mental differences from who you were before the bullet and who you are now. Mitchell asks you to essentially look in a mirror to see if he made any mistakes, and it's within this mirror that we can create our character. Afterwards, we move on to the Vigor Tester, which is the excuse used to determine our special stats. Special is a Fallout staple. It stands for strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, and luck. From a role-playing standpoint, many of these stats can help you dictate just how smart or strong or overall talented you are. In terms of overall gameplay, these stats are an incredibly important factor in terms of your build and how you will experience the journey throughout the game. Take intelligence, for example. If you care about skill points at all or care about maximizing at all, a high int stat is almost a guaranteed necessity, as the level of your intelligence factors into how many skill points you receive per level up, at a rate of 10 plus half of your intelligence. If you have 9 intelligence, you'll receive 14 skill points in your first level up, with the additional 0.5 carrying over into the next one. On the opposite end of usefulness is charisma, which is universally known to be a dump stat. Players can progress through the game with 1 charisma and never really worry about filling it up at all. The only thing charisma affects outside of bonuses to some skills initially, like speech or barter, is the effectiveness of companions. Companions are special NPCs in the game you can have tag along your journey after recruiting them. They have their own storyline, questline, and perks that can be unlocked by engaging with them, and their effectiveness or companion nerve is dictated by the charisma stat, starting at a 5% boost to damage and armor, leading to a 50% boost at level 10. However, companions are ultimately still useful and effective at 1 charisma. In terms of maximizing the player's effectiveness, charisma is essentially useless outside of the role-playing aspect. It should be noted that luck will specifically affect how good you are at gambling within New Vegas's various casinos. A high luck stat can make the process of getting kicked out of a casino much easier, but at the cost of various other stats. Once you're done with the Vigor Tester, Mitchell will comment on your overall stats, specifically if you are an all-rounder or if you have one stat that is particularly high or low. The next step is to sit down with Mitchell as he throws some psychological questions at you in order to determine your tag skills. The question process is inherently arbitrary. It's made to be arbitrary. Its only inclusion is for the role-playing aspect, as regardless of what you choose, in order to better define your character's personality, you can still choose whichever 3 tag skills you want. Tag skills are 3 skills you can select out of your total skills to give a 15-point boost to at the start of the game. This can be used in subsequent playthroughs to make sure you meet certain skill checks early in order to optimize quest progression and experience gained, if that's your thing. I want to take a moment to point out one specific set of questions Mitchell presents to you. At one point, Mitchell begins a Rorschach test in which you are shown an assortment of symmetrical ink drawings and are asked to explain what you perceive the picture to be. What do you perceive this picture to be? If you've never played this game or never played the DLC, take a moment to pause the video and let me know what you think it is. Now take a look at the options that were provided to you for an answer. Was your perception expressed within one of these options? If not, wait until the Honest Hearts DLC section where this will be brought up again and you'll hopefully feel a little more validated. Following this, players get to choose up to 2 special traits. You don't have to choose any at all, and the reason for that is that most traits provide both a bonus and a detriment to the player. For example, you can get an additional point of agility to your special stats, but will also be crippled more easily in battle. That's really not that bad within the gameplay of New Vegas, so it's more a positive trait to pick overall. That being said, I generally choose 2 specific traits for every playthrough, those being the Skilled trait as well as Wild Wasteland. Skilled provides 5 extra points to every skill you have, at the cost of taking a 10% EXP hit for the remainder of your playthrough. This can be be immediately remedied within your first level by taking the first level of Swift Learner perk, which provides a 10% bonus per the amount of times you selected, that being a maximum of 3. So the real cost of the trade is either 10% of your EXP through the total playthrough or 1 perk. And in terms of what's more useful, you're getting a total of 65 skill points, which you could consider a perk in itself when comparing it to the around 14 to 15 you'll receive normally. Once all of the questions have been answered and all of your stats set up, the player is given some clothing and a Pip-Boy before being sent down their way. The Pip-Boy is another staple item within Fallout as a series. In New Vegas and Fallout 3, it acts as your main menu to see stats, interact with your inventory, check your map and quests, and notes like a journal. This is how the player is able to properly navigate the world, fast travel, and keep track of what they're supposed to do. As a mechanic, the Pip-Boy fits right in with the world of Fallout. It adds a sense of immersion to the traditional menu concept and allows players to properly roleplay their character as if they were looking through their own set of logs and statistics. It's like a big, clunky Fitbit. There's still a necessity in terms of suspension of disbelief, of course. The player wouldn't realistically be carrying 20 guns and 4 different outfits while trekking it through a desert. But the added level of immersion, no matter how small, is always a benefit to a series. Before leaving, the player is offered the ability to turn on New Vegas's unique feature of Hardcore Mode. The main features of Hardcore Mode include Stimpaks healing over time, having weight assigned to ammunition, and requires the player to eat, drink, and sleep regularly, otherwise they will suffer various status debuffs that can eventually lead to death if unchecked. The idea of Hardcore Mode is to add a sense of realism and simulation to New Vegas, something I don't think fits particularly well within the game's design and engine. New Vegas at least tried to make it worthwhile by adding the ability to cook food and survive off of the land. Survival is even its own stat in the game. It's so tied to hardcore mode, however, that playing on normal effectively makes this skill useless. There's virtually never a time when cooking food is even mildly a necessity. And what is the reward for keeping this mode enabled from start to finish? An achievement. Even the developers say this mode isn't recommended, so for that reason we'll be playing on normal, which I consider the intended experience. On a related topic, work and reloading benches also exist for similar purposes. Players can convert ammo from one type to another, or craft various usable items like weapon repair kits. Within all of my years of playing New Vegas, I don't believe I ever found this to be immediately necessary within any capacity. What New Vegas threw in as a bit of flavor to help players feel more involved with their inventory is just that. A bit of flavor. It's overall something you can completely ignore within your playthrough and never realize it was even a mechanic to begin with. You may start to question why you have so many empty ammunition casings, however. This would later be greatly expanded upon in Fallout 4, to its own detriment, but that's a topic for another video potentially. Upon exiting the house, the player is met with another set of DLC notifications. These include all 4 major story DLC as well as the notification for the Gunrunner's Arsenal, which I mentioned previously. Each of these major DLC raise the player's level cap by 5, meaning they go from a cap of 30 to 50, which is still relatively small considering how much experience you are going to be gaining if you plan to take part in all of the game's content. That's another reason I don't mind taking the skilled trait. There is an abundance of EXP to be had, and hitting level 50 isn't very difficult to do. That being said, you may find that you hit 50 early on before taking part in a large portion of said content, and that can seem oddly limiting in a way, but I don't think it's a bad thing. Take a game like Dark Souls, for example. You can level up essentially infinitely, but there is a soft cap on how much each stat increase will be based on how much you've already raised it. This encourages you to raise specific stats to certain thresholds and better specialize your character in a certain small subset of skills. It's the same in New Vegas, although much more simplistic. You level 50 times, meaning you have to decide what you want your character to specialize in ahead of time, so that you aren't left with the inability to finish off your preferred build. If you want your character to be good in guns, lockpicking, and medicine, you'll probably want to focus on those early on, and then spread out excess skills once you've met certain goals. The limiting factor of the leveling system makes it so that you have to specialize, and through specialization, you will find yourself strong in one scenario and less so in another. This allows for dynamic challenges based on the build you have decided upon. Dead Money, for example, is a very melee-centric generic DLC, but it doesn't have to be. That being said, if you haven't built for it, it's going to be quite the challenge for you. You're going to have to work your way around the map of the Sierra Madre Resort in a way that is going to be a bit more challenging for you over a stealth-based melee build, for example. Goodsprings is the start of what I consider, Season 1 of New Vegas. It's very easy to place certain aspects of the game's narrative and adventure within the mindset of a television series. You don't have to do this. It's just something I've thought about in the past. In a way, Goodsprings and the Journey to Freeside is the first big story arc or season of New Vegas. Following that is the player's exploits in and around Freeside leading into the Strip. Finally, you have the story arc centered around the Strip itself, as well as Mr. House and his rehabilitated tribals. Within the final arc, you can fit in the 4 DLCs, which I suppose you could consider movies that get released during the lifetime of the show. New Vegas lends itself very well to this line of thinking. The storytelling and writing are paced exceptionally well if the player takes the intended route to get to their destination, but they don't have to. And we'll talk about that a bit in a minute. The first NPC players will run into is the Securitron Victor, who has the image of a friendly cowboy on his CRT. Victor is the individual who saved you, and there's not too much to really get out of him at this point in the narrative. Victor lives in Goodsprings and ultimately manages to save you from an untimely demise. Various individuals within the town have their own opinions on Victor. Easy Pete, a retired prospector, holds no ill will towards him, while Trudy, a kind of town leader, is overly suspicious of him. At this point, the game is completely open to the player. They don't need to interact with Goodsprings at all. If you want to go and explore the Mojave, you can, but if you want to learn more about the man who shot you, if you're interested in information or even revenge, which is most likely, you can head into the local tavern to begin your inquiries. Before that, however, it's good to note that the cemetery is very close to your current location. Stopping by allows you to find the grave you were buried in, as well as one of the several collectible snow globes. These are somewhat similar to bobbleheads from previous entries, but instead of giving you stab boosts, can be sold off to Mr. House for small sums of caps, around 2,000. Add-on content can even have globes as well, which will automatically provide the sum of caps upon collecting them. Around your grave, it's also possible to find a pile of cigarette butts around, which can be used later in dialogue options to implicate the individuals who put you into the ground. So I want to set some ground rules for this retrospective, specifically the route and destinations we expect to run into. New Vegas is very open-ended, but it'd be wrong of us to not follow the main storyline like many other players would be doing on their first playthrough. Additionally, one of the major choices you make at the start, how you'll get to New Vegas, is designed to suggest the player take the longer of the 2 routes, which we will be doing, although we'll stop by the faster route to discuss it somewhat. With that in mind, our first stop is the local tavern in town, where we are immediately met with Sunny Smiles and her dog Cheyenne. Sunny effectively acts as an optional tutorial for the game, one that I think is rather well thought out overall. There are multiple steps to the tutorial that start with teaching the player how to shoot, how to use the game's new Iron Sights mode, something that wasn't in Fallout 3, and how to hunt, gather, and cook. Many of these steps can be stopped along the way if the player feels they are not necessary. In fact, the entire tutorial doesn't need to take place outside of maybe the shooting range. But if you do take part in each step, said steps will provide various rewards like items or payment. This is an incredible improvement on the tutorial segments of Fallout 3, which were on rails to an extreme. The player had to learn how to shoot, they had to learn the various mechanics of the game through their stay in Vault 101 as they grew up. There was no room for freedom within this section of the game, and said introduction was fairly long. After completing the tutorial, regardless of where you decided to end it, you're asked to return to the saloon and introduce yourself to Trudy, as she's essentially the town leader. Doing so has you run into Trudy while she's in an argument with a man named Joe Cobb. Joe Cobb is looking for someone, and he believes said individual is somewhere in town. Trudy isn't up for giving him any information on the subject. This is your first true exposure to the idea of factions. New Vegas is littered with small and large factions. The NCR are a fairly large faction, while Goodsprings is a fairly small one. Joe Cobb belongs to a faction known as the Powder Gangers, a group of chain gang prisoners who were brought to the Mojave to build a railroad, only to turn against their captors when given dynamite for the job. Players can choose to help Goodsprings in this situation or help the Powder Gangers, and there's a clear karmic line between the two. Goodsprings represents the good karma side of the choice. You can help individuals who are being bullied and attacked by the bad karma side, aka the Powder Gangers, and will for the most part be following these altruistic options when we can. Good karma choices will generally be the options we take the most, but we'll mention the bad karma options when
Yeah,
possible. Talking to Trudy informs you that Ringo, a caravaner, is holed up in an abandoned gas station just behind Doc Mitchell's house. Visiting said gas station introduces you to Ringo, who holds you at gunpoint. With no skill checks, the player can simply say that they mean him no harm, and he will immediately put his weapon away and trust you. I always thought this would have been the perfect time to offer a mandatory skill check, with some option of dialogue to get out of it if you didn't meet said skill check. But no, Ringo just trusts you. An outsider of the city that is not a Good Springs resident and very well could be a powder ganger. This is also your introduction to Caravan, an in-universe card game that can be played and one that I don't plan on going into too much detail with. The idea is that you construct a deck and create caravans with said deck in order to beat your opponent in bids for various contracts. That is a very light explanation. I never enjoyed playing Caravan, especially not as much as I enjoyed playing Pazak in Knights of the Old Republic or Gwent in The Witcher 3. Offering to help Ringo sets you on a quest to get help from various key Good Springs citizens. Sunny Smiles will join you no questions asked, believing that the powder gangers to be a problem that needs to be solved sooner rather than later, as they will eventually attack the town regardless. Some of the other individuals you need to convince require a bit more work. Trudy is one of those individuals. There's two ways to convince her to bolster the morale of individual unnamed citizens, so there's more hands for the battle to come. This is potentially your first introduction to skill checks. In Fallout 3, almost every skill check was possible to pass regardless of your skill, as it was percentage based and you could metagame through save scumming in order to get your desired effect every time. New Vegas answers this issue by making the skill requirements a hard number, meaning if you do not have 25 speech, for example, you're not going to be convincing Trudy of anything. But the game throws you a bone here. If you can't convince Trudy through charisma or speech, maybe you can convince her with a well thought out plan that requires a sneak check. If you're looking at the footage at hand, you'll see that I meet neither of these. Even with magazines, a temporary skill boosting item, I still am one off from meeting the speech check. This is where things can get a little more nuanced. An item like a stealth boy can raise your sneak skill to 100 to make you near invisible to enemies. It's a means of allowing you to get out of sticky situations or sneak in somewhere when your skill for it may not be up to the task. But if our sneak skill is 100, wouldn't that mean we can now pass the dialogue skill check with Trudy? Probably not, right? The stealth boy isn't providing you with any mental knowledge of stealth, it's just making you invisible, and the 100 plus to sneak is a mechanical side effect of that so the enemies won't notice you. But the game doesn't see it that way. Your skill through effects is your skill in dialogue, regardless of if it doesn't make sense, meaning we can stop by the Good Springs abandoned school, play through the hacking and lockpicking minigame, grab a stealth boy, use it, and then return to Trudy and convince her to help us. Obviously, skill bonuses need some sort of category or flag to dictate if they carry over into specific skill checks like dialogue choices. It really makes no sense to be able to use a stealth boy and suddenly have master level knowledge of stealth, essentially turning you into a post-apocalyptic Sam Fisher or Solid Snake. That's not what should be happening here, and it feels more like an exploit than a smart play that was an intended mechanic. Skill books permanently raising skills by one makes sense, kind of. Reading a magazine to help you convince somebody of something or help you repair something makes sense, kind of. Regardless, Trudy is convinced to help, and the next stop is Easy Pete, who can provide dynamite via an explosives check. Moving on is Chet, who runs the local general goods store and requires a barter check in order to provide leather armor to the citizens that are going to take part in the fight. Finally, Doc Mitchell will offer up stim packs without a fight, but the player can get a bit more out of him with a medicine skill check. I believe New Vegas' skill check system is overall an improvement on the one that was introduced in Fallout 3. It allows the player to meet certain requirements and forces them to fail if others are not properly planned out. This means that the player is generally not going to be able to hit every check unless they come back later, and that sometimes isn't an option. Subsequent playthroughs allow you to plan ahead for this, to maximize the amount of checks you'll pass as you reach them if you desire to. But this is generally not what will happen during an initial playthrough and can lead to the loss of bonuses and experience as successful skill checks provide them. You get bonuses for what you put your stats into, and you also miss out on certain aspects for those same choices. It's balanced in that sense. Before returning to Ringo, this is a good time to talk about the karma system in New Vegas. Outside of a role-playing aspect, the karmic system isn't super noticeable outside of what notifications you receive for actions you perform. In fact, it's very easy to get full good karma in this game regardless of if you make multiple bad karma decisions. Let's use Trudy's Saloon as an example. Near the entrance is a second entrance that is locked. Picking this lock to exit leads to bad karma. There's also a terminal inside that also leads to bad karma if you access and hack attack it, which leads to a safe unlocking that will also lead to bad karma when accessing it. These are essentially 4 to 5 negative karmic checks within this one room alone, but if you're playing a good character who makes good choices, this will never matter. You can steal, pickpocket, and access anything that isn't yours, and it will be overlooked and pushed to good karma based on the major choices you make throughout the game. Making a good morality system is difficult, and using the one that Bethesda provided in Fallout 3 is more surprising than anything else. Killing fiends and ghouls can provide plus 100 karma per kill, and that's to a maximum of 1000. It's comically easy to max out this stat and much harder to lower it unless killing civilians. And outside of one companion in the game potentially leaving you due to low karma, there is no real effect on the overall mechanics outside of your role-playing experience. In Fallout 3, your karma dictated which companions you could recruit. In Fallout New Vegas, this is almost a completely useless mechanic. Obsidian looked to fix and improve on a lot of what Bethesda offered, so it was surprising to see this mechanic be effectively turned useless. That being said, they did improve on it in their own way, and that was through the reputation system. Reputation is the player's social standing within any given faction. By completing quests for a faction or just doing nice things for them, the player will rise through the ranks of potential reputation levels by gaining fame. Tracked separately is the player's infamy level, which raises when they perform insidious acts, like killing civilians or getting caught pickpocketing or stealing. The player's standing is then gauged based on the values of each of these stats combined. If you're within a high fame threshold and have no infamy, you can be raised all the way to idolized status, but if your infamy begins to grow alongside your fame, you can move down to Dark Hero and eventually Wild Child. These are neutral reputations in a sense, as you've done so much good, they sort of overlook your bad, but you can lose out on bonuses this way. Additionally, getting too infamous with little fame can lead to factions becoming openly hostile. Bonuses and the range of fame and infamy are dependent on the faction at hand. Helping Goodsprings can lead to discounts from Chet and Trudy, and you can even lock yourself out of Ringo's questline if you manage to build up enough of a negative reputation beforehand. Maybe that's why he's so willing to trust you early on. You technically have a fairly neutral standing with Goodsprings at the start. Overall, the reputation system is a very welcomed mechanic that I believe should have replaced the karmic system entirely. Instead of karma, people judge you based on a combination of actions and inaction. I can even believe that the only reason the karmic system is still in this is because Bethesda most likely demanded it. Returning to Ringo and informing him of whether or not you managed to convince the individuals I mentioned previously will trigger Sunny Smiles to show up and inform you that the Powder Gangers have arrived. Depending on who you convinced, you will have various different experiences overall. With everyone convinced, your citizens will be armed with weapons, dynamite, and leather armor, making the shootout fairly trivial. The less you convince, the harder the fight will be, and the easier it will be for you to suffer losses. Overall, the questline is a fantastic example in terms of introducing the player to how Obsidian likes to handle quest progression and player choice. Every aspect of the quest, once accepted, has a level of modularity to it. Various bonuses can be attached to the quest in order to make a better result overall. You don't even end up going through with this quest, as you can choose to side with the Powder Gangers instead. This has less options within it overall, but offers a clear choice right at the start and still allows the player to be introduced to several skill checks and moral choices regardless. The character you built and how you plan to roleplay them will dictate what is available to you by the climax of this quest, and many other quests within the game are tailored to follow a similar ideology. Upon defeating the Powder Gangers, as we have chosen to do, Ringo will praise the player for his help, offer him a reward in caps, and ultimately offer a greater reward when we run into him again later on. In terms of interaction and quest lines, Goodsprings essentially becomes stale at this point. Everybody goes back to exactly what they were doing before, except Ringo is no longer there and the Powder Gangers are no longer a threat. So where do we go from here? Well, asking around about Benny and the people who helped in your attempted murder points you in the direction of the strip, but it's not so easy to access it, and I'll explain why shortly. Benny knew this as well and therefore took a different path. If the player is to follow them, they are directed towards a neighboring town not far off known as Prim. There's a choice presented to you by this point in the game. You can head south and follow Interstate 15 in order to take a long route through various settlements that will lead you along the quest for revenge and answers in terms of the men who shot you in the head. Alternatively, there is the opposite direction of the I-15, an option that is the road road less taken. Despite New Vegas being within sight of Sloan, the construction camp beside the local quarry, approaching Sloan has players stopped by Chomps Lewis, who informs you that the road ahead is infested by Deathclaws. If this is your first foray into the series, you may not know what Deathclaws are, and that's excusable. Deathclaws are ruthless creatures, ones that can attack you while ignoring your armor rating. Sure, you can kill the odd young Deathclaw stragglers around the area, but one adult is most likely going to be too much for you at your current level, with the area ahead infested by them. Deathclaws are potentially the biggest wild threat within New Vegas and Fallout in general, but New Vegas has one or more species that we'll look into later, and said species can give Deathclaws a run for their money. So south it is, and while there aren't Deathclaws infesting the roads ahead, there's plenty of powder gangers for us to deal with, and they're less than happy about how we treated their friends back in Goodsprings. This is where faction armor becomes a more prevalent mechanic. Generally speaking, I don't think I ever actually found myself using faction armor all that much within my general playthroughs of the game, but it does have key advantages here and there, the most obvious of those being its ability to set your infamy rating back to neutral while wearing it, meaning if you wear a set of powder ganger armor, NPCs that would originally be hostile to you will no longer attempt to attack. In fact, this allows us to enter the NCR correctional facility down the road without worry of being shot on sight. It makes sense to stop by said facility early on as well, as it is directly connected to one of our main destinations, Prim, which we will be heading to shortly. On the way, it's good to mention the atmospheric quality of the game's OST and sound effects. New Vegas, without any radios, gives off an eerie feeling of isolation within the Mojave. The groans and moans of the instruments leave you feeling defensive, and every interaction you make with various NPCs on your travels can feel a little threatening in their own right. Are people who they say they are? Are they looking to help you or stab you in the back? A lot of people are out there for themselves and themselves only, leading to a lot of confrontations throughout your travels where individuals are far less than genuine in how they present themselves to you. None of that matters, however, as most players are going to be navigating into their Pip-Boy and turning on Radio New Vegas, baby.
Yeah, that's fair.
New Vegas has two major radio stations, Mojave Music Radio and Radio New Vegas. Mojave Music Radio is a non-stop station purely for playing some old-timey country and western tracks. Stuff you'd expect to hear in a time before the bombs fell back between the 40s and 60s, although some of these songs were made as early as 2003. Radio New Vegas is a little more than that. Similar to Fallout 3's Galaxy News Radio, Radio New Vegas is hosted by a DJ, that being Mr. New Vegas, whose soothing voice and charismatic attitude is used to draw in listeners. Mr. New Vegas is an example of a mechanic within multiple open world games where the player's actions can be seen to have taken effect through news stories on the radio. Grand Theft Auto was probably the first to popularize this, and it's been a staple of open world games with radio stations for years to come. The effect of the radio in New Vegas, in my opinion, removes all of the intended atmosphere from traveling the Mojave wasteland, but not necessarily for the worst. Rather, it's a choice that the player gets to make. Do they want the feeling of isolation and danger throughout their travels, or do they want to trek along Highway 95 while listening to Johnny Guitar, Jingle Jangle Jingle, Blue Moon, and many others? It's up to the player, and while on subsequent playthroughs I like to experience the isolating nature of the desert from time to time, I always find myself returning to the radio and blasting Big Iron throughout. Approaching the correctional facility with powder ganger armor attached prevents you from being attacked, but it doesn't necessarily fool the guard at the front gate, who will still need to be paid 100 caps in order to enter peacefully. Within the visitor center are multiple no-name powder gangers alongside Myers, whose sole purpose is related to a Prim quest line we'll come back to later. We're not here for Myers or any of the small-time powder gangers anyway, we're here to meet Eddie. Eddie runs things around the facility after the powder gangers took over, and he has some jobs for you to take care of as an alternative to him killing you right then and there. I Fought the Law is a short quest line where you help the powder gangers with a few various tasks before ultimately leading to an NCR assault on the facility. It starts simply enough, with Eddie asking you to deal with another powder ganger named Chavez, or former powder ganger I guess you could say. Chavez has broken off from the main group within the NCRCF and is shaking down travelers on his own with a few other deserters. If your speech skill is high enough, you can convince him to leave the area. If not, like Super Rad Jr. here, you're forced into an altercation, leading to either your death or theirs. Regardless of how Chavez was dealt with, you can return turn to Eddie, who has another task for you. This time, there is a merchant looking to sell around the facility, and he hasn't been run off yet, which is suspicious to Eddie, and he tasks you with investigating. It's around this point I ran into Barton Thorne, who claims his girlfriend is being attacked by geckos up by a nearby ridge. Heading over to the location he mentions and dealing with the geckos brings you to a stash on top of a cliff and our first encounter with the Wild Wasteland trait. Wild Wasteland's entire function within New Vegas is to cause weird, scripted sequences to take place. Shortly after leaving Goodsprings, for example, you can find a fridge with a hat similar to that of Indiana Jones, which references a scene from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where Indy hid in a lead-lined fridge to avoid being killed by a nuke. It's pretty absurd, and this is a way for the developers to poke fun at that. Similarly, on the ridge we're met with a corpse of Johnny Five Aces, a character from an abandoned video game concept called Zyborn Clock, something that was mocked constantly on the Something Awful forums. With the area safe, Barton approaches you and explains that this was all a ruse so that he could kill you and take the stash. A fight ensues, and then we quickly move on towards the merchant we were here for in the first place. An intelligence check of 6 or a speech check of 30 allows you to dig into the merchant's business within the area. He admits to being a bounty hunter and can be convinced to be sent on his way, though I ended up killing him anyway. I don't think there was a karmic reason not to. Again, not that karma really matters in this game. Returning to Eddie for a potentially final time has him inform you that he is worried about the NCR potentially coming to take back the facility and tasks you with heading to Prim to find out information before reporting back. This is why hitting up the NCRCF early is a nice way to pace the player towards Prim. It gives a second additional reason to head there outside of chasing Benny, and in a way helps the role-playing experience for people that want to head to Prim, but don't necessarily want to follow the main quest line. Approaching Prim alongside the highway, you're stopped by an NCR soldier, informing you that the town has been overrun by powder gangers who have broken off from the pack. When asked if they will be attacking the correctional facility, the soldier has no idea, and informs you that Lieutenant Hayes may have more information. When asked why they aren't protecting the town, you're informed that they aren't under NCR jurisdiction, and even if they were, the NCR are too short on supplies to do anything about it. This is an interesting situation that we'll touch on in just a minute, as it helps better paint the priorities of the NCR and showcases how they aren't necessarily the good guys they portray themselves to be, despite performing good from time to time. In terms of finding out about the correctional facility, there's multiple ways of going about it. Lieutenant Hayes won't tell you anything unless you pickpocket a trooper for military orders, but there's another way of going about this that involves heading further into the actual town proper. Heading across the bridge to Prim, you can watch out for and disable mines along the way. After dealing with a few powder gangers turned escaped convicts, you can head into the Vicky and Vance casino, where the remaining townspeople are held up and armed to the teeth. Seriously, I'm pretty sure if the town felt like it, they could easily take the neighboring hotel back without any issue, something the NCR could do as well if they wanted to, though they claim they can't. Instead, it's in the hands of you, an individual, but not just yet. Instead, we can talk to Johnson Nash for a variety of important topics, those most obvious being information on Benny and the cons who attacked you. Johnson will inform you that the sheriff has been murdered, but his deputy, who was captured in the hotel, may have information that you're looking for, thus encouraging you to head inside and save both the deputy and the town. Nash works for the courier service, and handing over the order for the platinum chip you were carrying allows him to give you more details about how the delivery came to be. It turns out Victor, the cowboy Securitron from Goodsprings, was the one to put in the request, along with 5 other orders. 6 couriers were hired to deliver various casino-related goods. You had a chip, another individual had a pair of dice, another courier had a chess piece. The more interesting dialogue is about how you weren't the first one who was asked to take the package. Instead, another courier saw your name next on the list and
7-hour video, man,
demanding that you take it instead. I looked into it and asked around because I didn't remember this dialogue being in the original game before the DLC. The courier in question is an individual named Ulysses, who is the main antagonist
Fallout
of
New Vegas,
a storyline DLC that takes players into the Divide. Originally, Ulysses was going to be a recruitable companion character, but that never panned out further into development. Still, one of Obsidian's and New Vegas's greatest strengths is tying narratives together, and so getting some insight into a character from a DLC I would consider almost a second finale to the game is rather thrilling upon additional playthroughs. We'll learn more about Ulysses near the end of the video, but in the meantime, we still need to ask Nash about the NCR's plans for the correctional facility, either through a bribe, which we can cheapen through bartering or through convincing him with a speech check. I've mentioned it before, but this is one of New Vegas's greatest strengths within quests. Regardless of your skill level, there's always hidden paths or possibilities that can help you get to your desired outcome. Nash was just a means of doing this, but we could have pickpocketed a trooper like mentioned beforehand. Nash informs you that the NCR are planning a raid on the facility, which sounds a little silly when you take a second to think about it. Due to jurisdiction and chain of command, the NCR are unable to help the innocent civilians living in Prim who are openly under assault by individuals from the same facility that the NCR managed to lose due to giving dynamite to convicts. They don't have the supplies to help Prim, but do have the supplies and manpower to attack the correctional facility. It doesn't really add up, or rather it shows the motivations of the NCR, shows what's important to them, their property. The NCR doesn't own Prim. It isn't under their jurisdiction, and therefore it is of less value to them. Human life is less valuable to the NCR over the property that was taken from them, especially when said property was simply a prison used to perform slave labor on a railroad. And that's exactly what this is. Slave labor. The convicts are cartoonish in a way within New Vegas, but they're still humans, still individuals, ones who don't necessarily deserve to be worked against their will. It's odd to see the Legion portrayed as villainous for owning slaves and pushing their will on the Mojave, while the NCR is doing the same thing, just under the social construct of laws and justice, rather than the social construct of an empire. Both of these individuals are inherently doing harm to humanity, but the NCR does it in a way that we as a society value more. We value innovation and progress, and we see that through the construction of these laws and imaginary systems we create to better control civilization. Law is made up, capitalism is made up, and we choose to accept it. And many choose to see it as naturally good because it can lead to innovation, something that many also consider naturally good. Whether innovation is truly a natural good for the evolution of the human race isn't the point of this video, but it showcases that the NCR and the Legion are much more similar than the NCR would have you seem. We just accept the NCR's will a little more than the Legion's. The NCR doesn't care about helping civilians, they care about getting their slaves back, and that's something you can help them with if you choose to. This isn't a defense for the powder gangers. Even with their freedom now, they still instill harm onto others. They shake down civilians, try to take down towns with violence. We've already seen this in Good Springs and have to decide how we're going to handle their existence or if it's even our problem. These are a lot of assertions without fully expanding upon them, and that's because the politics of the NCR and their comparison to the Legion isn't the entire point of the video. Rather, I want to look at the key points throughout the game that are designed to make you question just how morally good a militant force actually is. New Vegas is a game designed around making you question the politics and militarism of our everyday lives. It's a mirror of our society that we can look into and form observations of our own. We have two options within the scope of the game. We can warn Eddie about the oncoming assault, or we can help the NCR. Warning Eddie leads to the assault taking place and no reputation lost with the NCR. However, the troopers who assault the facility will be naturally hostile to you, and engaging with them could lead to a rise in infamy. Instead, we're going to side with the NCR in this one for the sake of it, both due to the danger the powder gangers impose and due to the fact that they become less prevalent to the point of not mattering at all very shortly afterward. Heading over to the correctional facility and talking to Sergeant Lee will begin the assault, with NCR troopers spawning in and swarming the grounds after a breach in the gate. The only actual individual that has to be killed is Eddie, but all of the powder gangers along the wall will be hostile. Surprisingly, the gangers in the visitor center will not be dealt with by the NCR, even after the fighting has ceased, meaning entering it is still hostile territory, although Myers won't fight you as he is still quest relevant. With Eddie taken care of, NCR troopers will now loiter around the area. You can return to Lieutenant Hayes to deliver the news, and he'll congratulate you for it, but there's still the issue with Prim, which the NCR still isn't willing to deal with, despite the facility not being a factor anymore. To get more information on Benny, we need to save Deputy Beagle, who is being held hostage within the Bison Steve Hotel. There's a few ways you can enter the hotel proper. A broken down set of roller coaster tracks can allow you to get in through the upper level balcony, but the front door is as good an option as any, especially with a surplus of stealth boys and silenced weapons. Skyrim wasn't the only Bethesda game to popularize the ranged stealth build, let me tell you. Traversing the hotel is simple enough. There's a few convicts to take out along the way, and if you have the lockpicking skill for it, you can open a door that will take you straight to Beagle without needing to deal with too many many hostiles. Though we'll be taking them all out anyway for the experience and items, it wouldn't be a Fallout/Elder Scrolls game without looting every corpse we come across. We can convince
He's right,
Beagle
you know.
to tell us about Benny right then and there if we can pass the skill check for it, but most likely you'll be releasing him first and maybe convincing him to help you kill the remaining convicts. Regardless of how you did it, once Beagle is outside, he will tell you about how Benny and the cons moved on from Prim and began traveling towards the next town over, that being Nipton. We're not done in Prim just yet, however. There's still one more quest for us to take care of, as well as the ability to unlock our first companion. Prim is sheriffless, and Beagle is both unfit for the role and also refuses to take it, meaning it's up to you to find someone to take care of the town in your absence. There's 3 options for this, one of those being Myers from the correctional facility. Since Myers is one of the potential candidates, he isn't openly hostile to you when shit hits the fan during the raid, and regardless of your reputation with the Powder Gangers in general, in order to get Myers to take on the task of sheriff, he needs to get a pardon from the NCR. Alternatively, you can ask Hayes to have someone from the NCR take over and officially put Prim under their jurisdiction. If you've been following my views on the NCR in general up to this point, you might think both of these options sound less than desirable. Luckily, there's a more neutral alternative. Within the Vicky and Vance Casino is a Protectron known as Prim Slim, who can be reprogrammed through a science skill of 30 or with specific miscellaneous scrap items. This allows Slim to become the sheriff of the town and also leads to Beagle losing his deputy status. I'll let you figure out which option we chose. With the town considered safe, there's one more stop we can make, right by the corpse of one of the 6 couriers who has been shot dead. This specific courier was carrying the pair of dice I mentioned earlier. Within the Nash residence, which also seems to be the building for the courier service, is a damaged Enclave iBot named Eddie. Players can repair him with a very high repair check of 65, but can lower this with a similarly high check of science at 50. This lowers the repair check to 35. Alternatively, items can be used to repair him instead. Eddie is most likely the first companion you'll run into within Fallout New Vegas. You can have up to 2 with you at one time. 1 pet companion and 1 humanoid one. There's 2 pet companions in the game, the first being Eddie, and the first humanoid companion will be meeting shortly, although they won't be joining us immediately. An important mechanic of companions is their related quest lines that each comes with. How these are triggered and progressed is unique to each companion, and worth doing for each one due to the various rewards granted to the player, as well as upgrades to the companions themselves. Eddie, for example, has a set of logs within his file system that can be triggered via hearing specific keywords. There's plenty of NPCs that you can talk to who act as said triggers, and these logs lead into the greater quest arc for Eddie specifically. In the meantime, the next destination for you is Nipton, but there's one detour to make along the way, that being the NCR's Mojave outpost. Around this point in the game, there's a good chance you've obtained at least 1 Sunset Sarsaparilla star cap. Like in Fallout 3, drinking soda bottles provides you with the cap that was attached to said bottle, since within the universe, caps are used as the main form of currency. Sarsaparilla is specific to Fallout New Vegas, though Nuka-Cola still exists as well. What makes Sarsaparilla special is the 5% chance of you receiving a cap with a blue star underneath it. Once the player has collected at least one of these through drinking the beverages until they find one, or finding one in the wild, the player will trigger an event where a man by the name of Malcolm Holmes will approach them. Malcolm starts off the conversation under false pretenses. He acts as though he wants to trade with you, but this excuse quickly crumbles as he doesn't find himself to be a good liar. The true reason Malcolm approached you is because he witnessed you getting a star cap. How this is possible is unknown, as there are many locations where you could receive the cap that Malcolm simply couldn't have been able to be there at the same time. This requires another suspension of disbelief from the player. You're forced to play along with the idea that Malcolm saw you get one of the star caps, even if you were inside a building that Malcolm couldn't realistically have been in at the same time. It's a jarring occurrence and not the only time this happens. Excuses like this from the developers can temporarily pull you out of the roleplay or immersive aspect of the game, while you have to mentally justify that this is somehow a logical setup for a quest, even though it clearly is not. Malcolm gives you the rundown on the mechanics involved with star caps. There's a legend that collecting 50 of them will lead to unimaginable treasure guarded by an enigmatic individual known as Festus, who we'll meet later. People will get so riled up about the legend that they'll actually attack one another if they know you have star caps. Asking Malcolm if he is a collector leads to him
Oops,
denying
oops,
that he
ooh,
collects
oh God,
any
not
more, and
export,
ultimately
import, there we
wouldn't
go.
tell you if he was anyway for his own safety. That being said,
It felt
killing Malcolm
weird
reveals
seeing
that
the
he
new,
does have caps on his person, so whether he collects them or not is still up in
seeing
the
the
air,
new
but he doesn't
export
seem too
thing
willing
on
to give them
Premiere.
away, suggesting that he is still
It ain't-
actively
it ain't the
collecting,
same.
but isn't someone who would kill another for it. I generally have this interaction with Malcolm immediately after leaving Prim, assuming I received a star bottle cap within that time. Near Prim is a highway patrol station, and within one of the cells is a corpse with a star bottle cap. Further down towards Nipton, you have the opportunity to witness an altercation between two individuals, Thomas and Jacqueline. It's up in the air who will kill who and can be different every playthrough, or determined by your intervention. Both will tell you the same story, however, that they were attacked by the other for their star bottle caps. Thomas, however, has a journal on his person which sheds a bit more light on the subject. It seems he ran into Jacqueline, who began seducing him on their travels, only to ultimately attempt taking his lucky star cap necklace, suggesting Thomas didn't actually have any knowledge of their perceived value. There's more to the star bottle cap questline once you've reached New Vegas and obtained 50 caps for yourself, but that'll be saved for further down the line within our adventure. Before reaching Nipton, there's a good chance you'll make note of a large statue off into the distance of two members of the NCR, specifically a desert ranger and a Nevada ranger,
Oh no,
acting
damn it.
as a
Damn
symbol
it.
of their
I lost the
unification
frickin'
into
sequence.
the NCR. This is in front of the Mojave Outpost, used as a base of operations for some of the NCR, as well as a stopover for caravans that want to go further south. No one's going anywhere south, however, as the roads are essentially closed. There's a lot of frustration emanating from this area, not for the player necessarily, but for the NCR and the caravaneers that are stuck there. The Mojave Outpost is understaffed. Their job is to protect the interstate and those traveling along it, but after the prison break at the NCRCF and the establishment of the outpost at Prim, NCR forces have been stretched thin. You'd think that this would mean our interventions at Prim and the NCRCF would lead to the outpost being fully operational again, but this isn't the case. While Prim is still not under NCR jurisdiction, and while the NCRCF has been taken care of, one can reason that after the battle there's still a lot of manpower that would need to go into getting said facility operational again, meaning that the outpost at Prim may still be considered necessary even with Lieutenant Hayes leaving after everything is said and done. The lack of manpower has led to a lot of danger surrounding the interstate further south and a backlog of caravaneers who are stuck and frustrated about this fact. Rose of Sharon Cassidy, aka Cass, is one of these frustrated individuals, as well as a potential companion within New Vegas, although we can't recruit her just yet. Talking to Cass allows her to explain how her caravan was hit and destroyed with nothing taken, leading her to believe it was the Legion who are making more and more of a presence within the West. Now, with nothing to do and nowhere to go, she's stuck at the outpost and drinking her sorrows away, which only seems to frustrate her further. She suggests that you check out the Crimson Caravan branch south of Vegas if you're looking for work. We'll come back for Cass later, but there's a few things we can do to both boost our supply and gain some fame with the NCR. Talking to Ranger Jackson gets us a job involving exterminating some giant ants down the road. It's nothing special, but it's on the way to Nipton, and coincidentally, Ghost, a sniper on the roof of the outpost, would like us to go recon the area, considering no one has come out of the town for some time. Nipton is more of a spectacle than an actual town. It's set up for you to arrive at and essentially witness a stage play performed by the Legion, with this most likely being your first interaction with them upon starting the game. You're first met with Oliver Swanwick at the entrance of the town, an ex-powder ganger who can be seen cheering in victory. Approaching Oliver has him inform you that he's won the lottery, but doesn't go into much detail further than that before running off and out of the town. Right beside the two of you is the Nipton General Store, and inside is another powder ganger by the name of Boxcars, who is forced to permanently sit down due to having his legs bashed in by hammers. What exactly happened here? Boxcar explains that he and a group of other powder gangers arrived at the town and made a deal with the mayor to hold travelers hostage and essentially strip them for everything that they have before turning them loose. Nipton is considered a bit of a cesspool to the surrounding inhabitants of the Mojave. It's a known stopover for individuals looking to partake in what Nipton is truly known for, sex work. The mayor saw this as an opportunity to make some money by essentially trapping travelers who showed up for it. But then what happened to Boxcar and the rest of the town? Enter the Legion and the Lottery. The town was taken over by Legion forces, and as an act of judgment on the town, Vulpes and Kulta, the leader of the group of scouts and spies known as the Frumentarii, handed out lottery tickets to every individual within Nipton at the time. First came the lucky losers, who would die a quick death if their number was called. Following this was crucifixion for those called next. It's important to point out that this isn't exactly like the popularized imagery of the crucifixion of Christ. For the most part it is, but the developers seem to have opted for tying individuals to a cross rather than nailing them to it. And this is still fairly accurate to the capital punishment that took place all the way back in the 6th century before Christ. There's nothing you can do for the individuals at the time. All of the NPCs on crosses within Nipton are so near death that to remove them would be to simply kill them anyway. So you can choose to leave them up there to die slowly or put them out of their misery. It's your call and ultimately doesn't affect any part of the narrative, though it would have been an interesting choice to give the player in terms of karma, and where the developers think the act of mercy killing lands on the karmic dial, if you can even classify it as that. Remaining civilians were killed, enslaved, and Boxcar, who was second place, was ultimately set free but not before having his legs broken with hammers. Oliver was then essentially the true winner of this system, being the last one standing. So you can better understand why he was so happy to be free and less interested in being classified as a powder ganger any longer. As a side note, you can attack Boxcar here and he will simply stand up from his chair, fully able to walk and attack you. It's not that he was lying, but more that this just didn't seem to be accounted for by the developers. I'm sure they knew about it, but most likely didn't care. We want Boxcar alive anyway, as he is a key NPC within a side quest, one that I am unsure will be featured in this video. Approaching the town center, you're met with the Legion, who have control over Nipton currently, with Vulpes and Kulta the leader among them. You can fully converse with the character as he has bigger plans for you at the time, and attacking that many legionaries at once is less than likely to end up in your favor. Vulpes explains his motivations for the actions that took place in the city, calling it a town of whores that had no moral standing for the individuals that walked through it or partook in its services. This gives us a bit of an outlook into Legion values. Caesar's Legion centers around purity and being holier than thou, seeing acts of weakness and cowardice as things that need to be punished and determining it is their duty to punish those that fall under these categories. While many saw Nipton as a cesspool, but ultimately not a danger or a problem, the Legion sees a virus or blight, one they don't want to see spread and one they feel a moral obligation to stamp out, in such a way that no one should ever try it again. They hate cowardice and weakness, but look to instill fear into the people of the Mojave, to exert their will, absorb communities by any means necessary, and ultimately punish those who fight back to the point that they no longer exist. It's oddly contradictory. The Legion cares about strength and purity, but kills those who don't fight back and kills those who do in an incredibly violent manner in order to send a message. What the Legion really seems to care about, or what Kaiser himself may seem to care about, is power. And to obtain that power and to create his empire, he has used violence, totalitarianism, and brainwashing/intimidation to exert his will. And those in power within his regime have drunk the Kool-Aid. Those who don't either don't rise through the ranks or get punished to the point that it will most likely lead to their death, if not intense physical punishment. Remember how I said that the Legion is inherently evil? This is what I'm talking about. They are meant to stand as a moral contrast to the NCR, even though we can see some similar structure between the two. Both the NCR and the Legion utilize slavery. Both the NCR and the Legion exert their will and take what they want by force. The Legion will commit atrocity after atrocity to send a message, and the NCR will do little to help those individuals unless they are under their jurisdiction. You may not think the NCR are as bad as the Legion, which I believe to be true as well, but the comparison shows you the cracks of the NCR's moral high ground, how they are not an inherent good within the Mojave, but may not be an inherent evil necessarily either. Well, except for the slaves. They do have slaves, and that's pretty evil in my eyes. Vulpes instructs the player to deliver a message to the NCR back at the Mojave outpost, specifically that they are here in the Mojave despite not having control of the dam and are spreading. He wants you to instill fear into the hearts of the NCR with this news of what happened in Nipton, how the town outnumbered the Legion but all were too scared to fight back against them, simply waiting and hoping that their time would not come in terms of the lottery, something Volpez sees as an unforgivable weakness, and also how he views the
I
rest
could
of the
even
Mojave. The psychological factors that
freaking
go into people standing up to an oppressive regime are not so easily labeled as weakness, even from a man that gets erect when he burns a mayor alive on a tire fire. There's not much more to do within the outpost. We can pass Volpez's message along, which forces this one NPC to go down a depressive spiral. We can report back to Ghost, who is sorry to hear about Nipton, and we can report back to Jackson, who will give us a service rifle. With Nipton out of the way, we need to keep moving further down the I-15 to find Benny, and this will take us to a new town and our first human companion. Heading to Novak is when you'll most likely start running into various patrols around the wasteland, specifically NCR and Legionary patrols, but also groups of merchants and doctors sprinkled in between. Legionaries are openly hostile to anyone, including you depending on your fame and infamy with them. By this point in the game, you most likely haven't done anything to openly aggravate them, meaning they won't be hostile towards you, but that shouldn't matter. The Legion patrols the Mojave and attacks anyone on site regardless of if they are NCR or simply merchants. Yet you, someone considered as much a neutral party as a doctor in the wastes, are not targeted at all. Our first interaction with Volpez makes sense. He had a task for us, and he let us live to complete said task, but these patrols realistically shouldn't know who you are nor care by this point. If the Legion is pushing into the Mojave, capturing civilians, creating slaves, and attacking the NCR, you should be just as much a target as the rest, especially since you most likely have NCR fame by this point. This isn't a huge detrimental flaw within the reputation system, and you'll see later that we end up pissing off the Legion anyway and immediately rectify the situation. The only real issue here is their seeming neutrality towards you doesn't seem to make a ton of sense based on what we have been presented within the setting of New Vegas. Close to Novak is a large, more traditional town off in the distance known as Camp Searchlight. It was originally occupied by the NCR but ultimately attacked by the Legion, who set off some sort of radiation bomb that heavily irradiated the entire area, both causing feral ghouls to spawn as well as hostile NCR ghouls on top of them. Searchlight is littered with ghouls, and there's a few ways you can deal with that, but before entering the town proper, players can enter the cellar of the local church and run into several scavengers who are looking around in there. Logan, the leader of the group, informs you that he's looking for radiation suits so that they can pillage the town, and asks for your help if you are computer savvy in any way. A minimal science check will allow you to hack into the nearby computer and see that a shipment of radiation suits were ultimately taken around Nipton by individuals who didn't look like NCR troops. This is where Boxcar comes into play, and ultimately the reason he hasn't been killed yet, if that's what you're looking to do. Boxcar is the only one left alive who saw the shipment and points you along your way to a cave that is housing the suits you are looking for, as well as one individual suit for yourself. You can bring these suits back to the scavengers and ultimately take them with you while shooting your way through the town. You make 2 stops along the way, one in the local police station and one in the local fire department, looking to grab items and miscellaneous parts labeled as NCR. Once you've found everything, the group turns on you and you ultimately have to kill them. There's not much to this quest. I most likely wouldn't have even mentioned it if it wasn't such a large town leading up to Novak, as well as the connection to Boxcar I mentioned previously. It's an excuse to make your way through an irradiated town. There's even a giant rad scorpion fight to go through if that's your thing. You can tell that there is no real layering or choice to the quest that is missing here, since killing Logan doesn't fail the quest like Boxcar would have, but instead completes it. There's a few other quests relating to Searchlight we'll go over later on in the journey, but one can be completed now. All of those ghouls you've been murking with Logan and the gang were NCR soldiers, and as such have dog tags attached to their person. The player can talk to Sergeant Astor about the radiation in Searchlight, and he will ask you to collect dog tags of all of those turned feral. One of the soldiers is actually still sane, just chilling in a house minding his business. You can kill him, convince him to go attack Astor, or convince him to give you your tag to get the final one before returning them all to the sergeant. Novak, or No Vacancy, see, if you didn't see that on the sign before entering the town, is a community centered around a motel and a tourist attraction giant T-Rex. Asking around about Benny points you towards one of said snipers, a man named Manny Vargas, but there's something we can do within the town before that. Talking to No Bark, the resident crazy person, if you can call him that, allows you to learn about how the cattle of Novak have been getting periodically attacked by invisible creatures. Talking to the owners of the ranch informs you that this happens almost every night around midnight, and taking the time to watch the cattle around midnight allows you to witness the approach of a nightkin concealed by a stealth boy. Nightkin are a type of super mutant, individuals that have been turned into Hulk-like creatures and lost the greater part of their intelligence and reasoning skills. Nightkin specifically are super mutants addicted to stealth boys, and prolonged use of stealth boys have led to even more neurological issues within the Nightkin specifically, including schizophrenia, which we will get an example of later. By killing the Nightkin and informing the ranchers that their cattle is now safe, you'll gain enough fame in Novak to be recognized by the population. In fact, talking to Jeannie Mae Crawford, who runs the motel, you can get her room for free due to your reputation. There's still plenty to do here, however. Talking to Manny about Benny, for example, will have Manny ask us to help him out first as a means of trade. Turns out there's an infestation of ghouls at the local Repcon facility, and he wants them cleared out so the community can salvage the area for parts, as this is their main source of income. Manny is the day shift sniper within Novak. The night shift sniper is a man named Boone, who happens to be the first human companion we can actively recruit, but he has some work for us before that's possible. Boone has lost his wife. She lived in Novak with him, but ultimately was taken away by slavers. He knows this to be true, and so this isn't an investigation about what happened to her, but rather an investigation into who set it up. He asks you, an impartial stranger to the community, to begin looking into it, as it should raise less suspicion this way. Boone gives you his beret and asks you to bring an individual you believe to be the culprit to the front of the giant T-Rex with his beret equipped. This will be the signal that they are the culprit, and he will take care of the rest. Asking around about Boone's wife informs you that she was essentially hyper-privileged and let people know it. She came from a posh society and wealth, and living in Novak wasn't in any way what she was used to, something she would rudely voice fairly often. It can be pointed out to the player that this was perceived as a coping mechanism to handle the harsh life of the Mojave, but that doesn't change the fact that it may rub some of the other civilians the wrong way, and ultimately seem to be what led to her demise. While this may have been the cause, this doesn't mean it was deserved, especially when the individuals that purchased her were members of the Legion. The easiest way to find the true culprit is to head into the reception area of the motel, where there's a safe that can be picked. Alternatively, you can steal the key from Crawford. Inside of the safe is a bill of sale, acting as evidence for the sale of Boone's wife between Crawford and the Legion. You can bring Crawford to the front of the giant T-Rex at night, equip the beret, and then watch as her head explodes via Boone shooting her dead. There's a few things that point to Crawford being the culprit, mostly how hostile she can become when the town is talked down on in the slightest. This is something you can see right away when talking to her for the first time and have the ability to apologize for. With it so easy to set Crawford off, it'd be no surprise that she was the one to orchestrate the events against Boone's wife, who was so openly against Novak as a whole. Everyone else in the town comments on her attitude, but ultimately reasons why she is the way she is, through the tough transitional period of privilege to the harsh reality of the wastes. The only other suspect is Manny, who was known to be openly hostile and argumentative with Boone's wife, to the point that Boone and Manny had a falling out within their friendship. Since there's two major suspects, the only way to be sure is via hard evidence, which we get with the bill of sale. It's an interesting quest and ultimately allows you to do a bit of asking around at detective work before snooping around. You even have the freedom to frame some of the inhabitants of Novak and have them murdered instead, but this leads to a karma loss and ultimately locks Boone out of being a companion. Speaking of that, returning to Boone allows you to explain to him how you knew it was Crawford and then ask what he will do from here. You can offer for him to travel with you and speed up the process with a high intelligence check that mentions how snipers work in pairs. This is a good point to discuss a few more mechanics about companions. First are their bonuses, with Boone offering the spotter perk and Eddie offering the enhanced sensors perk, both of which are fairly useful moving forward. Players have access to these perks as long as their companions are in their party. Spotter causes enemies to glow red when using iron sights, and enhanced sensors sensors essentially gives the player a 10 in perception, allowing them to notice both hostile and non-hostile NPCs on their HUD from the maximum distance possible. It also allows you to target cloaked enemies and VATS, which is normally not possible and will force a 0% chance to hit if you try. I mentioned earlier how Eddie has a set of triggers that will unlock playback of logs he has saved on his drive. One of those triggers is from Old Lady Gibson at Gibson's Scrapyard, and we'll be stopping there during our quest to clear out the ghouls within the Repcon facility. Boone, on the other hand, is more complicated. He has a mechanic known as history points. Players that have Boone in the party and complete certain tasks will get a predetermined set of points, with 5 being necessary to unlock his companion quest and relative upgrades. Boone hates the Legion as an ex-member of the NCR and for what they did to his wife, doing things like completing certain anti-Legion quests and helping the NCR against the Legion in specific quests can help build his history points throughout your journey. This game even lets you kill the Legion leader Kaisar at any point you deem fit, and that alone gives you 2 history points with Boone. There's one major flaw with this mechanic, however. The individual has to be in your party when you complete these tasks, and said tasks may not be completely obvious in terms of offering these points. If you don't recruit Boone, or if you have another companion with you at the time and complete all of the possible events that would raise his history with you, you ultimately lock yourself out of his progression quests. Ultimately, it's understandable why they decided to do it this way. If the individuals aren't with you, how would they see your actions and ultimately build rapport with you? But for gameplay's sake, I think there needed to be some sort of alternative here. If you clear a camp of legionaries for the NCR, or if you are the person to kill the leader of the Legion, you should be able to at least convey that through dialogue and maybe evidence to Boone so that he can still build up to his side quest. Before heading out to Repcon, you may be surprised to run into Victor, the cowboy Securitron here. Victor doesn't know why he's here when you ask, simply feeling compelled to travel the path towards New Vegas, and essentially meaning you will see him on your travels as you progress as well. Additionally, Novak is home to one of the first unique weapons you may find on your playthrough, that gun. Unique weapons are generally a completely new weapon or a reimagining of existing weapons with several bonuses. That gun, for example, offers an incredibly high critical boost, but was ultimately difficult to repair without the jury rigging perk or the release of the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC, as there was no weapon similar enough to it that it could be broken down. The Repcon test site is for testing rockets specifically, and comically designed ones at that. It's also infested with both ghouls and nightkin, as you will see shortly. You can find several corpses along the way of ghouls in robes and dead nightkin. At the entrance of the site are several feral ghouls that can be taken care of before heading inside. Once inside, you are immediately met with the voice of one sounding like a ghoul over an intercom, who gives you instructions to reach a point in the facility where you will meet with them. Not all ghouls are feral. Several of them remain sentient and can live through radiation as well as many years longer than typical humans. Making your way through several more ferals will eventually lead to the back of the building and up multiple staircases to find the hiding spot of several sentient ghouls and one human. The human, Chris Haversam, is a unique individual due to him believing he is a ghoul while clearly being perceived by everyone else as a human, even by the ghouls surrounding him. Further into the back of this area is Jason Bright, a sentient glowing one, ghouls so full of radiation that they glow a green light. Jason is seen as a messiah to the ghouls surrounding him. They follow him in what could ultimately be considered a religion, or more so a cult if you want to be overly pessimistic about it. Thoughts on religion versus cults aside, Jason clearly believes in what he preaches, that being visions he has for the far beyond, an irradiated sanctuary for him and all of his followers where they will get to live in peace. Jason sees you and Chris as individuals sent to him by an enigmatic figure known as the Creator, who will help him and his flock essentially make it to the far beyond. The main reason Jason needs your help currently is because he and his group are trapped within the upper levels of the facility due to demons, those being several nightkin who attacked them on sight. One of said demons interacted with their group through the intercom and told them to stay put for their own safety. They've been stuck up there ever since, and Jason is asking for your help in solving the situation by any means necessary. Heading into the basement, the player will run into several hostile nightkin unless they take a more stealthy approach. In fact, taking out too many nightkin along the way locks the player out of resolving the conflict via a more peaceful approach. As you progress through the basement, you will come into contact with a non-hostile nightkin by the name of Davison. While not hostile, Davison is still suffering from the effects of the stealth boys, to the point that he believes a nearby deer skull named Antler can talk to him. Antler appears to be the reasoning side of Davison personified into an inanimate object, a way for his rational thought to be conveyed to him. Antler informs Davison that the player may may be of use to them, as they were informed through a shipping manifest that there is a large shipment of stealth boys delivered here. There's only one room left for them to search, but it is being guarded by several traps and a ghoul who is hostile towards the Nightkin and has killed several of them. Additionally, if you kill too many Nightkin along the way, which you will likely be forced to if caught, Davison will be openly hostile with you and lock you out of further peaceful progression, as I mentioned previously. This might sound like an annoying requirement for you as a player, especially if you haven't been leveling up your stealth stat, but the developers accounted for this. You're in a testing facility full of dead Nightkin. It makes sense that you would find several stealth boys along your exploration through the facility, and that's exactly what happens. The player can grab several stealth boys specifically to help them with this task and prevent them from running into the Nightkin before they are no longer hostile. Davison gives you a key to the last room to search, and upon entering, you're met with Harland, a ghoul mercenary who doesn't necessarily buy into all of Jason's religious mumbo-jumbo, but ultimately appreciated the company and through his own omission seemed to protect the group so he could sleep with all the women there. After the initial attack of the Nightkin on the ghouls, Harland and several others were pushed into the basement where they ran into even more Nightkin, thus sealing their fate. However, Harland managed to make his way into the room at hand and ultimately seal himself in with several traps scattered about. Harland also refuses to leave unless you do something for him, that being finding out if one of his friends is still alive after getting kidnapped and jailed by the Nightkin. The answer is she isn't, and effective use of stealth boys will allow you to head towards the jail and ultimately kill the jailer to get a key and find their dead body. Once you deliver the bad news to Harland, he'll abscond, but you also could have simply killed him and been done with it. It's up to you as a player. Regardless, you can now navigate over all of Harland's traps to reach the shipping log computer and find out that the stealth boys were sent in error and ultimately returned to sender. Informing Davison of this irritates him, but Antler believes you and the knight can ultimately leave peacefully. Returning to Jason has all of the ghouls, including any ferals you didn't kill within the interior of Repcon, head into the basement and towards the launch pad of 3 rockets that Jason plans to use to launch him and his flock to the far beyond. Now, it should be noted that Jason's feelings about this are genuine, but it should also be noted that this is the dumbest idea from any NPC potentially within the entirety of New Vegas. It's so unimaginably stupid to think that these rockets are going to go anywhere other than the ground. Well, they'll fly, but not very far and not for very long. The ghouls also get these silly spaceman suits, and you can pick one up for yourself as well. Talking to Jason here allows you to inquire a little bit more into Chris. Originally, the ghouls tried to convince Chris that he was human, but ultimately failed in doing so. After realizing how technologically adept he was, they planned to allow him to work for them under the assumption that he would be joining them, but the radiation surrounding the launch and expected to be within the far beyond would kill him, meaning Jason has lied to Chris about all of this. You can choose to chew Jason out about using Chris, but ultimately, in my opinion, this is what Chris always wanted, and you can convince him of this fact after breaking the bad news to him. A speech check of 50 lets you get through to Chris about the fact that he is truly human. In fact, the only reason he believed he was a ghoul was because he grew up in a vault and was bullied. Ultimately, it was the loss of his hair that acted as the final straw that broke the camel's back and had him go full goblin mode, or ghoul mode. Chris is pretty livid about this revelation because he feels used, but Jason didn't mean any ill will towards him over this, to the point that the ghouls revere Chris as a saint in their eyes, and you can convince him of this and also convince him to move to Novak after all is said and done. There's some maintenance to be done on the rockets before they can launch. In particular, Chris needs thruster modules designed specifically for the rockets, as well as Isotope 239. The thruster modules are easily found within Gibson's scrapyard. You can pay for them, barter for them, or use a perk to get them for free. You can also simply steal them after picking a lock. Since Gibson is the first person we talk to with the Eddie trigger, this will begin his first recording. The Isotope is a little more open-ended. The giant T-Rex shop in Novak actually has several rocket ships which contain some sort of irradiated component. 5 of these rocket toys will be enough to continue the quest, and this is usually how I go about it. However, you can follow a quest marker that takes you to a dead pack Brahmin and find a sealed isotope out in the open. Returning these items to Chris allows him to get the rockets ready to fly. If you went the other route and allowed Chris's rage to lead to revenge, you could instead gather items to sabotage the rockets, but we're nice people and ultimately going to send these dudes on their way. Once everything is set up, you can head to the launch tools and pull the lever to start the process. An intelligence of 4 or less will allow you to mash the buttons on the machine until you ultimately sabotage the launch. A science skill of 55 or higher will allow you to actually improve the launch slightly, though this doesn't really matter outside of a karma bonus. Once the launch is complete, Chris will head to Novak and you'll gain a large chunk of fame with the people there. Talking to Manny will complete the quest and have him divulge that Benny and the Khans were headed to Boulder City, further north of here, giving you your next destination. It's good to talk to Benny about Boone here, as he will explain their history as snipers of the NCR, as well as the massacre of Bitter Springs, which is required dialogue to start Boone's companion quest later on down the line. We'll talk about Boone's past more as we come to it. In the meantime, we're going to head north. Boulder City is a decent distance away from your current location, and there's a few key areas worth stopping by before we get there, namely Nelson, Camp Forlorn Hope, and Helios 1. Nelson is a mining town taken over by the Legion after they fought off the NCR in the Battle of Nelson in 2281. Now the town is used as an outpost for the Legion and also a location where they keep NCR prisoners. Approaching the town has you stopped by an NCR ranger named Milo, who needs help in sneaking in or around Nelson in order to put several crucified NCR soldiers out of their misery as a mercy killing. If you recall the Nipton section, I talked about the concept of mercy killing the settlers and powder gangers who were crucified within the town, and how the developers may look to explore that or place it on the karmic dial. Luckily for you, this is the exact quest that looks to explore this. While the individuals in Nipton were too near death to save, there's more you can do for the NCR prisoners within Nelson, despite not being able to dissuade Milo in his plan. Milo's thought process makes sense. He has troopers with him, but as he is a ranger, he has no leverage over them, and the troopers are too green and terrified of conflict to be of any help anyway. Saving the prisoners is too dangerous for one or even two individuals, with the game not accounting for the fact that you have Boone and Eddie by your side. Considering how the Legion treats their prisoners through violent torture and slavery, Milo believes that the only course of action is to put said prisoners out of their misery, and this is therefore the only thing you can agree to if you plan on helping him. Milo agrees to cover you while you go down there and put an end to the lives of the NCR prisoners, but Boone can comment on how you should forget that plan and simply save the prisoners while taking out anyone who gets in your way, and this is possible. No matter how stealthy you are, however, the minute you save one prisoner from crucifixion, you will be immediately targeted by Legion soldiers in the area, leading to a firefight. You don't have to worry about the prisoners in this quest after saving them though, as it's you and only you who are targeted by the Legion's attack. This quest is pretty straightforward. You can either save the prisoners at the cost of a firefight or quietly put them down. The end rewards of the quest don't really change based on your actions, but this quest does provide history points with Boone, those being 1 point for killing them and 2 for rescuing them. New Vegas normally does a good job of putting you in a hard to choose situation when it comes to doing the right thing. Sure, you can save the NCR prisoners, but they're in the middle of a well-guarded settlement, at least in theory. Mechanically, outside of a role-playing reason, saving the prisoners is incredibly easy and trivial. Players simply need to interact with each of the 3 and untie them. From that point, they're flagged as saved. More difficulty in keeping the prisoners safe and the actual threat of the Legion in the settlement would have provided a more impactful decision for the player, as keeping 3 unarmed NPCs alive against a large number of Legion soldiers would be much more difficult. Returning to Milo allows him to mention how you're a hero and he has some egg on his face. Within the actual setting of the game, Milo is pretty justified in not wanting to engage against such opposing numbers, so he takes it on the chin when congratulating you. Completing this quest along with everything else we've done for the NCR nets you enough points to be recognized by the NCR, and this is a good time to point out how we have been doing a lot for them, while simultaneously doing nothing at all for the Legion. The Legion is an interactable faction in New Vegas. You can complete quests for them and gain fame, but due to our choices thus far, we have a rather high level of infamy for them that we get an opportunity to absolve later on, and we'll use that as an opportunity to interact with the Legion slightly and explore their methodology and quest design before ultimately moving on from them. In the meantime, there's many more opportunities to deal with the NCR, as they are the prevalent force within the Mojave. Nelson is directly tied to Camp Forlorn Hope, an NCR base of operations not far north of the settlement. Stopping by with our current fame allows the NPCs to welcome us with open arms, happy to see someone that has been such a useful friend of the NCR show up at the time we did, especially since there's so much going wrong at the camp at the moment. What's most interesting about this location is the morale system. The main questline, Restoring Hope, tasks you with completing completing various assignments that culminate with an assault on Nelson in order to take it back from the Legion. The morale system is raised by completing local quests in the camp that can raise the morale from 0 to a necessary maximum of 9. The more morale the player has by the climax of restoring hope, the stronger their forces will be when retaking Nelson. It's a good way of conveying progress to the player, watching the camp go from being a rundown mess of tired soldiers to a little better off and even successful in why they're there to begin with. In the main quest proper, you're first tasked with finding a lost supply shipment that didn't make it to the camp and are directed towards Helios 1 to find out more information about it. You can talk to Lieutenant Haggerty there for more information on the shipment, but it's ultimately unnecessary as you can find the shipment not far off surrounded by dead NCR troops. Picking up the supplies triggers an ambush that you have to fight your way out of before returning the supplies to the camp. Following this, the next task is to help Dr. Richards with several wounded soldiers in the nearby medical tent. What's nice about this section is that you can complete everything easily with a high enough medical check, up to a maximum of 75, I believe. With the check being so high, there's an alternative involving the use of various medical equipment, most of which can be found around the tent. The only thing you can't find in there is 1 super stim pack and 2 out of the 3 required medics. Luckily, I ended up remembering seeing some medics near the Repcon entrance, and I had plenty of super stims from, I'm assuming, the DLC. After some backtracking, it's fairly simple to save each of the patients. You can attempt to help the patients through medicine with a low skill, but will ultimately end up killing them in the process. These 2 major tasks are the only thing you need to complete before being sent off to Nelson for an assault, but as mentioned, you can raise the morale of the camp through several other tasks that aren't part of the Restoring Hope questline. I didn't opt to do that here, and even with simply succeeding in the main quest, we still have enough troops to be more than enough, especially since you've already dealt with Nelson yourself earlier. Once you've taken out the Legion leader within Nelson, you can report back to the camp for fame and experience. This is also around the point you may receive an NCR radio for having such high fame with them. The radio can be used to give you a temporary follower who can die unlike your normal companions. It's usually for things like assassination attempts or when accidentally running into raiding parties, but overall the NPCs are so slow to show up that the fight is usually over by the time they get there. Moving on to Helios 1, we get our first introduction to a faction known as the Followers of the Apocalypse. The facility is a giant solar plant at a glance, but there's a bit more to it than that, with the NCR ultimately fighting for the location against the Brotherhood of Steel, who fought tooth and nail to keep it before being pushed to retreat. Lieutenant Haggerty points out how the plant isn't generating as much power as it's worth in guarding it, especially after taking it from the Brotherhood of Steel, a faction known for their proficiency in old world energy weaponry. Heading inside allows you to meet with Ignacio of the Followers of the Apocalypse. You can talk to him and convince him that you're a neutral party, which makes him more comfortable in divulging information to you. Ignacio is only there out of curiosity. He observes that the Brotherhood fought harder than you would expect to hold this facility when it is seemingly only a power plant, and there are documents and logs suggesting there's more to the plant than just that. If the Brotherhood were here and defending it as they did, there's most likely weaponry involved, and Ignacio would like to see the plant up and running again in order to stop the NCR from poking around and finding something that could potentially be too dangerous. Ignacio mentions a keyword that keeps coming up, Archimedes, and we will see this name come up again shortly. Ignacio isn't the one in charge though, that's actually an individual by the name of Fantastic, who somehow convinced his way into the position despite being a drug addict with no real experience for the job. Talking to Fantastic informs you that the targeting mirrors are misaligned currently, meaning that the plant is working at minimal productivity. By getting 2 terminals outside to talk to the mainframe in the tower, we can then head to the tower and align the mirrors to begin producing a large amount of electricity. Fantastic mentions that if you are to head to the mainframe, make sure to send the power to the right place, and there's a few choices for that we can look into when we get there. But Fantastic wants power diverted to the New Vegas Strip and the NCR's Camp McCarran, as this is what will get him paid. Each of the terminals has their own issue in terms of being interacted with. The first terminal is covered in traps, and the second one has rabid NCR dogs that attack on sight, though killing them won't result in fame lost. Once both terminals are set and talking to the mainframe, you can head inside the tower, but before that it's good practice to grab all of the scrap mirrors lying around, as they can be used later when we finally interact with the boomers. The issue with the tower itself is that its defense mechanisms are online, and there's both turrets and robots for you to either fight against or disable on your way to the elevator that will take you to the mainframe. Once through, there's still the issue of fixing the connection to the mainframe, and this can be done in a few ways, either by fixing the generator or powering up a nearby robot to fix it for you. Once the mainframe is fixed, we can choose where to divert power, with the options being McCarran Karen and Strip, which is the NCR option, Fremont and Westside, which would power the poorer areas of New Vegas, the full region, which gives power to everyone but leads to frequent brownouts, or the full region at emergency output levels, which will overload Helios 1 and make it non-functional. Finally, there is the Archimedes 2 option, which will divert the power to a space satellite that has a giant laser attached to it. For the sake of bringing it up later, we're going to choose the Archimedes option. This is good for the retrospective, but also pleases Ignacio as the NCR will stop poking around and he has no idea where the power actually gets diverted to. Personally, I would normally choose the full region option, as this is the most good you can do within the quest in my opinion, and also allows you to get the most rewards from Ignacio. No matter which option you choose outside of overloading the plant, you can choose to also arm the facility's defense systems, which will fire a giant laser down onto all of the NCR below, leading to a large infamy gain and no real rewards. This is kind of like the Megaton choice in Fallout 3, where you decide whether or not you will nuke the town, but ultimately this is more of a side option overall rather than the crux moral choice we saw in the previous game. We're gonna put a pin in Helios 1 for now, but we aren't far off from learning what we've just accomplished there and how it can help us in the future. Now it's time to continue on to Boulder City and see if we can finally track down Benny. During the Battle of Hoover Dam, Legion soldiers were led into Boulder City by the NCR as a trap before the NCR ultimately blew it up. It's considered one of the more major events to take place during the battle, and a lot of NCR soldiers lost their lives during the conflict. In particular, you run into one soldier, Private Kowalski, who lost his brother while attempting to save civilians. Kowalski hangs out in front of a memorial that looks to honor those lost in the battle, including his brother. An interesting mechanic that you may not expect is the ability to shoot at the memorial only to be reprimanded by Kowalski. You have the ability to speech check your way out of this, but Kowalski doesn't seem like he'll talk to you further afterwards. Further into the town is Lieutenant Monroe, who isn't letting anyone into the city's core due to a standoff between the NCR and several members of the Great Khans. NCR troopers heading from Novak came under fire by the Khans and ultimately were taken hostage. Now reinforcements are attempting to get them back, but fear that the Khans will simply kill the hostages if they advance. You can offer to help with the situation, which Monroe will agree to, but not before pointing out he has no idea who you are. I was taken a little aback by this dialogue due to our involvement back at Camp Forlorn Hope. The developers seem to take care in making sure that the player is recognized for their efforts when helping a specific faction, to the point that the NCR quests may have additional dialogue where the individuals you interact with recognize you, but this isn't the case here. To Monroe, you're nobody, and he's never heard of you or your exploits, despite the fact that several people high up the chain do. It seems like an oversight on the developer's part, but you can explain away the issue by assuming Monroe was a little too busy to know about one do-gooder in the Mojave Wastes. Regardless, Monroe accepts your help, and you get to enter into the town proper as a neutral third party. Technically, there's a lot you can do here depending on how you want to handle things, especially since the Khans involved within this conflict are some of the ones who dug your grave and ultimately were complicit in your attempted murder. You essentially have three major options here. We either free the hostages via negotiation, free them through violence, or kill the NCR to help the Khans. Considering you've been chasing after the Khans and Benny for all of this time, it makes sense to at least interact with them first before making your decision. Heading into the Khan hideout brings you face to face with Jessup, who was eagerly awaiting your demise in the opening cutscene of New Vegas. He's justifiably shocked to see you here, as you are effectively a ghost he watched die back in Good Springs. One of the other Khans seen in the cutscene, McMurphy, is also in the hideout, but ultimately seems to have succumbed to his wounds, implied to have been inflicted by the NCR. Talking to Jessup, you can ask him a bit about the Platinum Chip and Benny. Ultimately, Benny betrayed the Khans and ran off with the chip before paying them, and Jessup has no actual idea what the chip is or what it's supposed to do, questioning why someone would make one out of platinum. Benny apparently has made his way back to the strip, and this is ultimately our final destination in terms of locating him. This doesn't mean we're going to reach it anytime soon, however. A speech check of 45 lets you convince him to release the hostages so the NCR can escort the Khans out peacefully, which he will agree to without much of a fuss. In turn, he provides you with a signature glider that belonged to Benny and seemed to be dropped on their journey throughout the Mojave. Returning to Monroe leads to a new problem. He's just received orders to attack the Khan's hostages or not. What is it with the NCR and their willingness to let hostages die as soon as any situation gets a bit hairy? It's not like the Khans are Legion either. They're considered raiders, sure, but there's more of a chance to reason with them over the Legion by a mile. This is a non-issue anyway, as you can simply convince Monroe to let them go as the plan has already been made and agreed upon. There's no checks here either. It's a pretty laid out can I go against my orders moment for Monroe, and all you need to do is say, yes, obviously, you moron, you silly fool. Of course you can go against your orders here in order to save all these lives. Why would you listen to your higher-ups over this one, you bootlicker? Okay, maybe bootlicker was harsh. Or maybe it isn't, since the dude had to consider if he was going to wipe out an entire group of individuals who agreed to a peaceful conclusion. That's the NCR for you. Listen to orders no matter how dumb they are until a wandering superhuman courier shows up to tell you otherwise. With the Khans leaving and the hostages safe, we can start making our way closer to New Vegas, but there's a lot of hiccups along the way. First and foremost is our third run-in with Victor, who is also making his way to New Vegas. After briefly discussing what happened with the Khans as well as Benny, he'll be on his way and we can choose to follow him if we want, but it's ultimately unnecessary to do so. Instead, we're going to walk north slightly to the 188 trading post, just ahead where you meet another potential companion and one of my personal favorites, Veronica. In terms of the overarching story of New Vegas in the DLC, both Eddie and Veronica have the most involvement within. Neither can actively accompany you into the DLC, in fact, no companions can, but there is a similar Eddie model in Lonesome Roan we will meet later, and Veronica has strong ties to an individual we will run into during Dead Money. It's really cool to see, and I will take a moment to praise how well New Vegas ties its DLC storyline into not only the base game, but between the DLCs themselves. Characters from one DLC may have had an impact on other DLC, and it's one of the most interesting aspects about them, seeing how everything weaves between one another. Veronica looks like a settler and not much else. She has a cheery personality, which is a big contrast to Boone, but there's more to her than meets the eye, and she explains that to you after offering to join you on your adventure. Veronica comes from a bunker, and she wants to see the world in order to build her own perspective of the world and societies that live within them. You can take Veronica with you by swapping out one of your human companions, but we're not going to do that just yet. Boone already has 2 history points, and he's hopefully going to get 2 more shortly after. One major line of questioning Verona asks you about is your feelings towards the Brotherhood of Steel. It's pretty obvious that she is a member. She makes remarks about living in a bunker with a big family, all of whom can handle themselves, and even if she's not at home, there's plenty of others who can take care of themselves out there and provide. Veronica will stay here for now, but we'll be back to see what she has to offer us in terms of storytelling. New Vegas is in sight, but as you can probably see from the footage, there's plenty of surrounding areas to explore and plenty of quests for us to deal with before even reaching Freeside. One such area is known as the Aerotech Office Park. Here we meet Frank Weathers as well as Captain Parker. Frank has lost his family after trying to strike it rich in New Vegas. He lost them to Legion slavers after running away, something you can find out after completing an intelligence check questioning why he's alive. Captain Parker, meanwhile, has a few issues of his own. There's people going missing around the park, and there's an individual named Keith in the community both selling drugs and cheating people out of their money via rigged gambling. I potentially wouldn't even talk about these 2 quests in particular, but Franks is going to take us to Cottonwood Cove, a Legion stronghold, and Parker is going to shed further insight into what the NCR is really like. We're going to backtrack a fair bit here after agreeing to help Frank find his family. First, we're going to head all the way back to Prim so we can discuss a major feature in New Vegas: gambling. The Vicky and Vance Casino is not functional upon your first visit, but after dealing with the events there and then dealing with some NCR deserters, it does eventually become operational once more, and so now is the perfect time to discuss gambling before it's all we're doing in New Vegas proper. Gambling in New Vegas isn't fair at all. It's completely based around the player's luck stat, which is honestly a nice touch. A luck stat of around 5 probably allows you to play what feels like a fair hand of blackjack, while anything lower will see you losing more often than not. A luck stat of 10, however, makes you the best gambler the strip has ever seen. Players Players can land on 19 in blackjack and then choose to double down while still managing to get 21 somehow. It's that powerful. To offset this, players can only win so much before being permanently locked out of gambling entirely, this being true for each casino. Every functional casino in Vegas has a limit on the overall earnings a player can make and multiple checkpoints that can be reached that will ultimately interrupt your gambling so they can bestow upon you various prizes on the house. Think of high rollers getting comped food and hotel rooms. You're probably spending a lot of money there and they want to keep you doing so, as generally the house always wins. Not Mr. House though, he'll get what's coming to him. This is all good and fine until your overall earnings reach a certain positive threshold, in which a manager will run up to you and inform you that you can't gamble there any longer as you are costing the casino too much money. They may say this fairly meekishly or more aggressively depending on the casino. Generally speaking, there are three major choices in terms of gambling. You have slots, roulette, and blackjack. They all function as you would expect them to, and you can alter your bets based on how much you'd like to spend per game. My personal favorite to play is blackjack. I find that even without a high luck stat, you can still come out on top more often than not by playing the game at least somewhat smart, although I'm no expert on its intricacies. But New Vegas cheats you based on luck anyway, so there's only so much you can do. After taking Prim for all it's worth, it's time to head back towards Camp Searchlight and a little further east to reach Cottonwood Cove. Cottonwood Cove is a Legion stronghold and slave camp. The only reason we weren't here earlier is because it directly relates to quests from both Camp Searchlight and the Aerotech Park. In fact, completing the Searchlight quest in a specific way, the way that we will be completing it, ultimately causes the quest with Frank to fail before we even meet him. The best course of action for this quest is to simply discover Cottonwood Cove without being detected and then teleport back to Searchlight, as Sergeant Astor will now have new dialogue for you, asking you to go plant a bug within the camp and find various pieces of intel so that they have a better idea of what is going on in there. If you're chummy with the Legion, which we're not, you can side with them and give false information to Astor, but since they are hostile on site currently and we don't really like them, we're not gonna bother. After sneaking around with your abundance of stealth boys, planting a bug on their radio, and getting several pieces of intel, you can return to Astor, who thanks you for your service and a job well done. There's more you can do here, however, as you can offer to wipe out the camp for good and completely remove the Legion presence by yourself. Astor thinks you're a little crazy, but in a good way, a little quirky death machine sort of way that the NCR really appreciates because they love killing dudes. I think there's actually a clip I have of an NCR dude being a little too on the nose when he says the streets will bleed red from anyone that disagrees with us bringing peace to the Mojave, or something along those lines. If I find it, I'll clip it here.
Nelson will serve as example. We'll bleed the ground red with anyone who opposes our peace.
There's a couple of ways you can deal with Cottonwood Cove. The most efficient way, and the one that gets you the highest praise from the NCR, is to locate a nearby radioactive truck and unload a set of radioactive barrels from it. That will irradiate the area and kill anyone in the vicinity. This, in turn, can fail the quest for Frank Weather and is the reason we waited until now to do it. So first things first, you head into Cottonwood Cove, via stealth or not, and reach the prison where multiple slaves are being held, including Frank's family. When engaging with this family, Mrs. Weathers explains that while not ideal, being a slave is still better than being with Frank because he was both a drunk and also highly abusive to them. You can free them, but ultimately they will not go back to Frank and you can break the news to him later. In the meantime, it's time to deal with the camp properly. Before activating the barrels, I personally like to take out the leader of the camp, as doing so while at this point in the quest should theoretically give Boone another 2 history points, meaning we only need one more to start his quest and we will get it shortly after this. Once the leader is dealt with, you can drop the barrels to kill the rest of the camp and then report to Astor for an additional reward. This quest, Eye for an Eye, is interesting for multiple reasons. Most prominent is how it ties directly into another quest, and without prior knowledge or proper footwork on your part, you could essentially fail the quest by killing innocent civilians who are trapped by the Legion. There's multiple examples of this littered throughout New Vegas. Sometimes helping one faction locks you out of dealing with another. Sometimes your actions can kill kill people or cause consequences that will ripple in a way. They lock you out of previously available quests. It's something you have to live with unless you're a save-scumming meta player like me by this point. I doubt this would matter to the NCR anyway, since they seem to be so gung-ho about mercy killing anyone who brushes shoulders with the Legion. We can return to the Aerotech Park to let Frank know his family is safe, but ultimately not coming back. A speech check allows you to convince him to try and get clean. He says he'll attempt to do so, as maybe being clean will bring his family back. I always thought that was a bit of a damaging thought process for him. There's no real guarantee that his family would come back at all after what he has done, especially with the abuse. Better for someone to move on for themselves rather than for the reunion of something he lost due to his actions. But Frank is a damaged man, and even when attempting to do the right thing, doing it for the wrong reasons kind of tracks. Now we get to deal with Parker, and oh boy, I cannot tell you how much I hate Parker. He's just one of the most spineless NCR members you'll run into during your journey. Parker has a few problems. One of those problems is a local resident named Keith, who I mentioned happened to be selling drugs and scamming people out of money via caravan. You can go talk to Keith, and with a high enough speech check and barter check, you can get him to admit to both offenses and sell Jet to you. This isn't enough proof, however, and you need more to show he's been doing what he says he has. Luckily, there's a locked desk in one of the adjacent rooms holding his marked cards. Funnily enough, you actually lose karma for taking these. You actually lose karma for stealing from the Legion in Cottonwood Cove too. Really great mechanic you have there, guys. Once the evidence is presented to Parker, you can opt to join him in arresting Keith. Parker attempts to do so, but Keith refuses to go and insults Parker in the process, using the fact that his wife left him as ammunition. And this is where things take a weird turn. Parker doesn't simply arrest Keith here. He guns him down, an unarmed man, before simply walking off and being done with it. You can bring this up to Parker, pointing out he killed a man in cold blood simply for insulting him. He simply blames Keith for pushing his buttons, claims no one will miss him anyway, and pays you for your services. What the hell is going on with the NCR that is allowing this kind of conduct to happen? Genuine question. We've seen a lot of questionable things on their end, but killing someone in cold blood, someone you were to arrest, and there's unfortunately nothing for you to do about it. Even if you could mention it to another NCR member, would anything be done? Probably not, and the questline ends here, so there's not much more to explore. Still, it's another look at the corruption that exists within the NCR. It seems anyone can join the NCR, and they don't do much to keep their ranks in check. We're not done helping Parker just yet, however. Despite his actions, there's still innocent people going missing, and we can choose to look into it for him, which we will do by beginning our journey along the outskirts of New Vegas towards the town known as Westside. On our way to Westside are a lot of attractions and sites that could stop us along our way, but there's two in particular I want to focus on. First of which is the Sunset Sarsaparilla factory, where the soda is made. Heading inside, we're greeted by a mechanical NPC known as Festus. Turns out the reason he has persisted all these years is because he wasn't human and just a programmed guide to offer history lessons on Sunset Sarsaparilla. If the player has 50 blue star caps, they can deliver them to Festus to receive the big prize/treasure for their endeavors. Unfortunately, the prize is simply the story of how Sunset Sarsaparilla came to be. It doesn't matter too much, but the synopsis is that the creator of the soda got the recipe from a random individual he met at a bar, and the story goes on to say that the stranger died soon after, so the owner made the soda in his honor. While I don't think it's confirmed anywhere, it's much more likely that the creator of the beverage simply killed the man who owned the recipe so he wouldn't have to pay him anything in order to use it, and then concocted a story around his death to feign innocence. Obviously, this is a rather lackluster prize, but it's almost an expected outcome. Festus was created in a time before the nukes fell, and the company actually only created the contest by accident when people began to believe the star caps led to a prize. This was actually a misunderstanding the company decided to double down on, as it was driving up sales by 300%, so the reward was kind of a last-minute decision from a greedy corporation who probably didn't want to give anything too expensive to an individual who brought 50 caps to the plant. You can complain to Festus about this, and it seems several others before the war complained as well, as there is a set of doors further in the plant you are directed to that will have a proper prize waiting for you. The proper prize, he mentions, is a fake sheriff's badge that was mass-produced and equally as lackluster as the story we were fed by Festus. The real reward for the player is a bit further into the room, where you can find the corpse of Alan Marks, an individual who we were warned about earlier on who hunted down individuals for their star caps. caps. Listening to a hollow log, it seems Alan managed to collect at least 50 caps before ultimately getting locked inside the prize room and suffocating to death. Kind of a messed up way to go, but I'm not going to shed a tear over a dude who was hunting people down for special bottle caps. You can take a unique laser pistol from his corpse called Pew Pew. It does enhanced damage than a typical pistol but costs 5 rounds per shot, so overall an okay reward for your efforts, but still fairly lackluster for the amount of work you have to put in to get 50 caps. Think about how much soda you'd have to drink. If you're going to give me diabetes, at least reward me properly for it. Right in front of Westside's entrance is a manhole with a label of The Thorn above it. Heading inside introduces you to the Arena of New Vegas, where you can bet on individuals fighting against irradiated wildlife and monsters, anything from rad scorpions to death claws. You can even participate to earn some caps, but it's nothing crazy. The real reason for being here is a quest I'm not going to go into great detail about. The proprietor, Red Lucy, wants you to collect various eggs from around the wasteland of various monsters. Doing so ultimately nets you caps and EXP, but the actual final reward is the ability to sleep with Red Lucy. It's a weird reward to receive for completing tasks around the wasteland and ultimately is useless outside of giving you the well-rested perk temporarily. We'll periodically grab eggs for the Thorn as we progress through various other quests, but it's not particularly necessary to do so, nor is it incredibly relevant to the overall plot of New Vegas. Westside, on the other hand, gives us a glimpse of what living outside of Vegas is like, particularly a direct contrast of the high life within the New Vegas Strip and the lows of poverty and the difficulties that arise with it. This is something we'll see a lot. Westside has its issues, but it's managing as best it can. People around Westside, not so much. Even Freeside, which we'll see much later, is particularly worse in comparison to the Strip, but overall much better when compared to other surrounding areas like Westside. The main point of interest within Westside is the Casa Madrid apartments, and in front of them is a super mutant named Mean Son of a Bitch. Mean lives within Westside doing various jobs, but mainly he deters raids by killing any fiends who wander into the town. The apartment proper is run by a man named Marco. Marco houses the rooms out to anyone, but it's the prostitutes pimped by Pretty Sarah that truly make the apartments well known throughout the wastes. There's a few other residents, including Tom Anderson of the Followers of the Apocalypse, who we will talk to later for Veronica's questline as one of the optional triggers to begin it. More importantly, Dermont and St. James live here, known around the area as simply scavengers. However, some investigating around the rooms within the apartment building reveal a ledger that details how the two have been kidnapping families and selling off their children, developing a routine to the point that they kill the parents along the way and only sell the kids. You can report to Parker with the evidence in hand in order to complete the quest, but you can also optionally confront the two men over their deeds, which turns them hostile. Killing them doesn't actually turn anyone else in the city hostile, though a few residents will complain that they're dead, in particular Marco, who is out to paying tenants. While Aerotech Park has been mostly taken care of, this is far from your last run-in with the NCR. While I mentioned it previously, it seems timely to remind you how the game structures itself. While you can interact and help the Legion along the travels, the progression of the game feels naturally inclined to provide more opportunities for you to interact with the NCR. They're stationed at Prem, the Mojave Outpost, Helios 1, and many other locations that are on your way throughout your journey, so it makes sense that you're going to be helping them and aggravating the Legion through natural progression mechanics within New Vegas, unless you make a conscious effort to not do so. And while New Vegas is still an open-ended experience, it'd be disingenuous to say it's not a guiding hand within some capacity. Many trails are designed to have you stop by key points that frame a narrative for your character and their progression and influence throughout the Mojave. You can bypass a lot of this, but it makes progression through the game harder than it would normally be. They give you the option, but punish you for taking it. Examples being the Deathclaw route earlier in the Retrospective. Trails and routes are very deliberate as well, to the point that trying to bypass the mechanics of the game by using the mountainside, similar to Oblivion, is near impossible due to invisible walls that prevent you from doing this. New Vegas wants to give you a choice, but they also want to push you in the right direction so you see as much as possible within the story beats that make sense. But this also means you're more likely as a general player to be pushed towards the NCR, which the game likes to comment on fairly often. You see the best and the worst of the NCR through your journey, and it ultimately culminates within the endgame questlines within the Strip. Seeking out the Legion isn't necessarily easy. You don't actually get an invitation to meet with them until you deal with Benny, and even when you can help them, you're more likely to run into the NCR first, such as when we approached Nelson. The game wants you, at least on your first playthrough, to see as much of the NCR as possible, and this is most prevalent within Camp McCarran, an NCR-controlled airstrip base where you'll be spending a large amount of your time. Camp McCarran is realistically falling apart at the seams, something that seems to be a trend with the NCR. No matter where you go, the NCR's morale is low, and logistics or the Legion themselves are effectively dismantling them until your intervention. It's the same here. Plenty of issues around McCarran that you can involve yourself in to make the base an overall better place. Major Daughtry is one of the first NCR members you can run into, and he tasks you with taking out 3 fiends who have been terrorizing the area. In fact, it's not the Legion at all that's a problem around New Vegas, but raiders like the fiends that are stirring up trouble nearby. The fiends are drug addicts turned merciless raiders. They look to push territory and buy more and more drugs to keep their habit maintained. The 3 fiends you are asked to take out are Violet, Cook, and Driver Nephi. Each of them are considered leaders within the fiends and unique within their own way. Violet, for example, has a pack of dogs she keeps close to her, one you can kill to take the brain of for use later. Don't ask me why yet. It'll make sense. Taking out 2 of the fiend leaders is enough for Daughtry to send out the first recon sniper squad from Camp McCarran to Camp Forlorn Hope, where we've already been. They can help you by offering advice when hunting the fiends, but it's ultimately unnecessary. We do want to interact with them at least somewhat before leaving, however, as there's a quest to convince one of the members, Corporal Betsy, to consider therapy for trauma she experienced at the hands of Cook. I won't go into detail as to what happened to her, but the quest is an interesting one for the major reason of allowing progressive thought to be narrated in regards to mental therapy. In particular, the player can convince Betsy to seek help by explaining how a mental wound is similar to a physical one and requires professional help and support in order to heal. Obviously, there's more to it than that. Mental health is something many struggle with and may even feel makes them weak, where a physical injury may not. People don't always take mental trauma seriously, and it's only been in recent years that we've seen a true popularization and normalization of therapy through means such as psychologists, for even individuals that may consider themselves mentally healthy. This is something I always found New Vegas particularly good at, expressing progressive values around some time when it wasn't particularly popular to do so. This game came out in 2010. This was 4 years before the events of the Gamergate movement/harassment campaign that everyone online was swept up into, whether they liked it or not. The concepts of progressiveness and feminist critique were considered to be encroaching on what was considered to be a boys' club for many, and this was attacked under the guise of ethical conduct within games journalism. Ultimately, it culminated in an explosion of long-running social attacks and harassment from #gamers against various women who were visible within the video game media scene. The reason I even bring this up is because I remember seeing many problematic individuals point to New Vegas as progressivism done right, but for the wrong reasons. Many of these individuals would often complain about in-your-face representation of marginalized groups. It was considered annoying, offensive, and disingenuous to them when any form of marginalized individual was featured in a game or any piece of media really that was more than just a passing reference. People would often point to one of your companions, Arcade Gannon, who mentions offhand how he is homosexual but doesn't make a big deal out of it. It made these individuals uncomfortable to be faced with the idea that marginalized groups of people could be front and center within the media that they consume, and the fact that their marginalization affects them and should or could be brought up within said media, and this led to the backlash that we now know as Gamergate. But this is a gross misinterpretation of New Vegas's values. New Vegas doesn't actively shy away from the fact that the marginalized are disadvantaged due to the values of previous generations and their effects on the current population of our planet, how different cultures affect and ultimately limit or discriminate against marginalized people. You can have a conversation with Veronica, for example, about her first love, how this was a woman and it was actively looked down upon by her community because they had such high value in internal procreation. People that were considered homosexual could be forced to procreate with someone of the opposite gender or ultimately be shunned out of the community. New Vegas points out these issues. It shows that they exist, and that's what makes the writing of this game feel so strong in certain points. It allows the normalization of the marginalized within everyday life while still pointing out the plights that they have to deal with, even when a modern civilization is considered to be accepting of them. To claim that New Vegas handled progressivism well simply because Arcade isn't loud and proud of his homosexuality to the player is a gross misinterpretation of what the game is trying to convey to you. It's one example of many that are not so cut and dry in comparison, and it's disingenuous at best, but ultimately shows how easy it is for certain individuals to contort the perspective of a work in tunnel vision one aspect of it so that it fits within their narrative. It's ironic ironic because that's exactly what the game is trying to explain to you is wrong, that the law isn't inherently good, that the community's best intentions may be wrong or damaging, as we'll see with the Brotherhood and as we have seen with the NCR, that there's still more growth to be done, and we have unfortunately locked ourselves into this capitalistic and religious trajectory that is ultimately hurting those around us that don't subscribe to the established norm. McCarran is one of the main ways to enter New Vegas. It has a monorail system attached to it that takes you into the strip proper, and this is actually one example of the options the player has in regards to getting in to hunt down Benny. It's a bit of a central focus for the questlines within the camp, and we'll start these off with an interrogation against a Legion prisoner. Lieutenant Kilroy has a very rare occurrence on her hands. Generally speaking, when legionaries believe themselves to be on the verge of being captured, they'll kill themselves to not divulge any info. However, a Legion Centurion opted to not do so and is now within the hands of the NCR.
That's pretty cool.
Unfortunately, Boyd isn't having any luck interrogating him and can't resort to less pleasant measures due to those crummy prisoner of war laws that they have in place that require them to treat human beings as human beings. Really pesky logistics there, but what do we have here? A courier who is not affiliated with the NCR has appeared and somehow does not fall under the rule of these laws, despite the fact that the Legionary is still an NCR prisoner in an NCR base. So moral and ethical observations out the window here. You've officially been hired on as a consultant for the NCR and are introduced to the Centurion Silas before heading into the interrogation room. Said interrogation can go one of two ways. You either beat the shit out of Silas or you trick him through cunning and tomfoolery, more colloquially known as speech or intelligence checks. Beating him up is pretty straightforward. You unleash the fury on him over multiple intervals until he talks. You then get the option to have him tell you what he knows or kill him out of sheer rage, or just so you can. It's a dumb route to go down in my opinion, but beating him senseless might also be your only option if you don't have the proper skill checks. On the other side of things, you have speech and intelligence checks, each of which goes down a separate road to the same conclusion. Speech checks generally belittle Silas until he is so angry he feels inclined to explain his superiority to you through the information he has. Intelligence is probably the most interesting, as you can convince Silas you're a Legion agent sent to assassinate him. Initially, Silas won't believe you, but through various intelligence checks, you can convince him to the point that he fears for his life, even calling for the lieutenant to rat you out. Not that it matters, as you aren't actually a Legion spy. Talking with Silas long enough gets him to accidentally divulge the information you're looking for before you admit to him that he was simply tricked, bamboozled even. He was a foolish fool who fell for our genius brain trap. The information that Silas is holding isn't much. It's mostly just that there's a Legion plant within the base, but that already seems to be obvious to the higher-ups there. This is merely one step in finding out who said plant is and stopping their plan if you so choose. And you do, because I do, and I need to show all of you what's happening so we can talk about it. There's a few small things you can do during this period. One individual who runs the supply shack is selling supplies on the side, and a particular trooper is requesting you get her husband's corpse back from the fiends, so he can be properly buried, which leads to this segment, since the devs probably didn't have the time to program in a proper animation for picking up a body. What we're most interested in is what Colonel James Shue has for us within the camp itself. Someone is getting the word out of patrol routes for the NCR, allowing the Legion to attack and put pressure on NCR forces around New Vegas. If you completed the interrogation by this point, you already know this, but you can offer to look into it, and Shue directs you to Captain Curtis, who is actively working on the investigation himself. There's a few people you can talk to about suspicious activity, but the main individual who actually knows anything is Boyd, who will inform you of someone accessing a nearby control tower late at night for what she assumes is a romantic rendezvous between two troopers. Issue is, they aren't breaking in, meaning it has to be someone higher up who has the access. Boyd can give you access to investigate, and since the rendezvous are happening late at night, you can perch yourself behind some aircrafts and wait until midnight. Waiting a little bit earlier will let you see Captain Curtis, the lead investigator on the case, walk into the tower by himself. Sneaking into the tower allows you to overhear a discussion with Curtis and an unknown legionary. The main takeaway from the conversation is that the monorail I mentioned earlier has been rigged with a bomb and is set to blow within a few minutes, and it really will blow up if you aren't quick enough to defuse it. You can either sneak out without Curtis noticing you, or engage with him, which will have him turn hostile. I believe you need to wait for him to attack you, otherwise you can turn various NCR NPCs around the area hostile, a bug/limitation that is ever present within Fallout 3 and New Vegas. If the player can run to the monorail within enough time, head inside of it and locate the bomb within the air vent, then pass either an explosives or science check, they can save it. Otherwise, the monorail will blow up and make it inoperable. This quest actually has a complete opposite side to it if you are working for the Legion and still on decent terms with the NCR, either through fame or by wearing their uniform. In this retelling, you confront Curtis and inform him you know who he is and that you are an ally with the Legion. You then plant the bomb yourself while framing another NCR member, guaranteeing that the monorail will be destroyed. The quest is, in a way, another look at how far the Legion has infiltrated not only the Mojave but the NCR themselves. Curtis wasn't some new recruit, but an established member of the NCR, a captain with a history. If he was Legion, it means any others could be, and lays out an air of suspicion on the entirety of the individuals around any NCR base. These are dangerous times for the NCR and the Mojave in general. Legion aren't just a band of savages. Well, they are, but they aren't just that. They have an active spy network and highly intelligent soldiers who have the ability and dedication to not only dedicate their lives behind enemy lines, but actively kill themselves to prevent the NCR from having any tactical advantage. They are highly dangerous through both dedication and ability, and if not for your intervention specifically, may have seen the NCR wiped off the face of the map. Maybe not with Mr. House there, but he still needs the platinum chip, which is in the hands of a certain casino chair member who shot you in the head. Killing Curtis acts as the final history point for Boone. Throughout our journey and through collecting these points, Boone can slowly open up to you in dialogue about the death of his wife, which happened to be by his own hands after tracking her down to a Legion slave camp that he couldn't infiltrate. Being the only one out there and out of options, Boone chose to shoot his wife dead from a distance, something that haunts him to this day, but he feels he ultimately deserves for past transgressions involving the massacre of Bitter Springs that he was involved in. Boone feels rightly responsible for what happened there, and he believes that misfortune is now destined to follow him until his ultimate death. These conversations will eventually have Boone want to head back to Bitter Springs to see if it makes him feel anything or clears his head slightly. The journey there is actually fairly out of the way and off most of the main roads, meaning there's a lot of wildlife to run into, and in particular you're going to run into a creature more frightening than even a Deathclaw, Cazadors.
No. Wait.
Cazadors are a mutated insect created by Dr. Boris within the Big Mountain Crater, the
just
central
happened to
location
you?
of the Old World Blues DLC. They are fast, erratic, and crater. Cazadors. To run into a roads slightly. The journey there is actually fairly out of the way and off most of the main roads, meaning there's a lot of wildlife to run into, and in particular you're going to run into a creature more frightening than even a Deathclaw, Cazadors.
No. Wait.
Cazadors are a mutated insect created by Dr. Boris within the Big Mountain Crater, the central location of the Old World Blues DLC. They are fast, erratic, and incredibly poisonous, making dealing with them particularly nightmarish in large groups. As you level up, they become overall less intimidating from a mechanical sense, but their sheer speed is incredibly terrifying even when compared to Deathclaws. Once you arrive at Bitter Springs proper, Boone wants to have a look around. He mentions a nearby ridge he was holed up during the conflict, where he goes into more detail about the events that took place. Bitter Springs was thought to be a base of operations for the raiding tribe the Grey Khans, who had been attacking a nearby settlement. Due to the connections of one of the settlers, the NCR sent everything they had from Camp Golf over to Bitter Springs, thinking they'd be entering into a large conflict with the Khans. This wasn't the case, however, as Bitter Springs was more a home for Grey Khan non-combatants than a gang hideout, meaning there were plenty of civilians such as children and elderly living there at the time. NCR soldiers engaged in conflict with the Khans after being spotted, ultimately pushing the civilians out the south end of the camp, where Boone and his spotter were stationed. As women, children, and the elderly began pouring out, they radioed in to confirm their orders, only for their major to freeze at the news, leading to a miscommunication that ultimately ordered the first recon to take out anyone and everyone that came out of the camp, resulting in the Bitter Springs massacre. After Boone tells this story to you, you you can respond in one of several ways. One of these responses can console Boone by telling him he was simply following orders, a rather damaging and problematic ideology that suggests soldiers cannot question the instructions of their superiors. The chain of command must be upheld until told otherwise by someone even higher up the food chain. If the NCR are simply following orders, no matter how misinformed those orders are, how are the individuals within the NCR any different than those of the Legion? The Legion has an evil leader and engages in evil actions, but the individuals within the NCR aren't innocent either. We just saw Parker kill a man in cold blood for talking back to him. Who's to say how many soldiers are going unchecked, and not just soldiers but higher ups, who may be using their power to impose their will no matter how questionable it may be. To follow orders then is to be complicit. It may seem unfair to constantly be criticizing the NCR when, the Legion is right there, but that's exactly what this game allows us to do. They set up an unmistakably evil faction to act as a mirror to the NCR, but what we are shown is that the NCR isn't this direct opposite they want us to think it is. The NCR is corrupt and not the ultimate good of the Mojave. The military and government in the real world is not ultimately good. Politics, individuals of power, greed, capitalism, and much more are factors that play a role within the individuals that govern or possibly control us. And this leads to ethical questions, moral questions, and ultimately corruption. There is evil in the world, but our leaders are not some unquestionable good in comparison. They're just not as awful. Sometimes. That's why you can question Boone on this, asking him how he could possibly kill people like that, and Boone will point out that it's not necessarily that cut and dry. That from the eyes of a scope, you don't necessarily know who is a danger and who isn't, especially with the Great Khans. Although you aren't given any examples of kids or the elderly attacking NCR outposts, so it's ultimately a moot point. Realistically, Boone and many other soldiers ultimately feared for their own safety and used the excuse of orders to secure the situation and ease their own minds. Something Boone realizes and questions every day. It's something that haunts him to the point that he believes he deserves to suffer until his death. Boone wants to sleep at the Ridge for the night to think about his past, which you agree to, but are ultimately woken up to Legion raiders approaching the camp, potentially the largest amount you've ever encountered, and Boone points out that defending the camp will most likely lead to his death, giving you the opportunity to leave while he sacrifices himself. He believes this to be the karmic conclusion to what he did here in the past and the end of his life. Helping Boone fight off the Legion isn't the easiest affair, but it's ultimately not that bad either, especially this far into the game. You most likely have enough offensive skills to deal with the various members that sprout up. Once they're all defeated, Boone is surprised to be alive and is now ultimately confused as to what is supposed to happen to him. I think the best thing you as a courier can convey to Boone here is that he ultimately is what he does within the world. If Boone is looking to repent, then he needs to do good. You are only what your actions make you out to be, and Boone ultimately wants to help people. No one is punishing Boone for his actions at Bitter Springs. They're all in his head. All he can do is persevere and continue doing good in the wastes. He can be set on a better path for the future, although this doesn't excuse his past. It's similar to real life. Your past bad actions and behavior may have hurt people, and while you may have changed for the better, ultimately the people you hurt do not owe you forgiveness. Life forces us to live with our actions and the consequences. It's up to us to move on and do better, just like it is now up to Boone. Boone unlocks a new set of armor for this, which you won't see in the footage here because I have him wearing the much more iconic NCR Ranger combat armor that is used as the mascot for New Vegas as a game, as well as being featured on the cover art. This is the end of Boone's greater storyline within the game and gives us the opportunity to temporarily send him back to Novak so we can head back to the 188 trading post to pick up Veronica. But there's a few quests we can complete in the immediate area first. Bitter Springs Lake Camp McCarran is falling apart. It's a refugee camp once run by the Great Khans, but taken with extreme force by the NCR, as we've just seen and heard. As we know, the NCR are spread thin as it is, meaning there's little to no troops to help out around Bitter Springs, and they're running out of supplies, including medical. The doctor, Lieutenant Markland, is also ill-equipped to deal with the psychological trauma a lot of the children around the camp have been experiencing. To top it all off, an individual has been sniping the refugees and stealing supplies every every night, so there's a lot going on here to say the least, but it doesn't take very long to deal with. Starting with the supplies and sniper, these are another 2 birds 1 stone situation, as the individual mentioned lives within one of the 3 nearby supply caves we will be visiting. For the most part, the caves are uneventful. It's not until the 3rd farthest cave from the camp that we run into a lone great Khan, Oscar Velasco. Oscar is a Khan out for revenge. Rather than moving with the rest of his tribe to Red Rock Canyon, he opted to stay behind and periodically attack the NCR and the refugees after what they did to the Khans during the Bitter Springs massacre. After passing a speech check of 50, where you can mention that it's not the fault of the refugees in terms of what happened to his people, Oscar will ask what he's supposed to do. You have 2 options at this point. You can convince him to go attack the people actually responsible at Camp McCarran, or to finally let this go and move to Red Rock Canyon to be with his people. Sending him to McCarran will undoubtedly get him killed, so it's best to send him back to his people to hopefully lead a more peaceful life. Oscar represents the other side of the massacre. At this point, we have only managed to see the guilt of the perpetrators, the NCR, after killing innocent civilians during the assault. Afterwards, the NCR decided to take the spot over as their own, effectively through immense bloodshed, which was not equatable to what the Khans had been doing to their supply lines. Oscar is the other side of that. We have a man suffering due to the NCR who lost his family to the massacre at Bitter Springs, and because of this conflict, in effect the NCR's revenge against the Khans, Oscar is now exacting his own revenge against the NCR, continuing the cycle of violence that would see no end until either party was wiped out or someone was to intervene and stop the conflict altogether. You get to observe the cycle of hate and violence, see how it affects both parties on both sides, regardless of who is at fault, and ultimately you have the ability to put an end to it, which is exactly what we've chosen to do here. Once we have all the supplies, we can return them to the camp, but our job isn't done just yet. Bitter Springs still needs more medical help, as well as some troops sent their way from McCarran, Forlorn Hope, and Camp Golf. We haven't been to Camp Golf yet, but heading over and asking for the troops with our reputation is all it takes to get some sent over. McCarran and Forlorn Hope have had our help already and are willing to send them over without much fuss. Camp Golf shows that there's always an opportunity for the NCR to properly manage each of their camps and make sure that there's enough troops per area. They just choose not to, or set their priorities elsewhere. The minute someone with a bit of clout shows up, the NCR will bend the knee and do whatever they ask, so why don't they simply send more men when it's requested by the camp itself? It's not a priority to them. Prim wasn't and isn't a part of the NCR, and Bitter Springs isn't actually useful to the NCR as it's simply a camp full of refugees who need help. And help isn't something the NCR gives unless absolutely necessary, even when the area falls under NCR jurisdiction. While at Golf we can talk to a squad known as the Misfits, it's not a particularly interesting quest, just a series of speech checks to get the squad to work together, but it does earn us some NCR rep. We'll be returning to Camp Golf a bit later after dealing with the Brotherhood. As for the Doctor, we can make our first but not last stop at the Crimson Caravan just outside of New Vegas. We can buy the medical texts here from a merchant and return them to the Doctor at Bitter Springs, who will use them to study up on psychology and trauma to better utilize his skill set at the camp. Once the supplies, troops, and medical needs have been delivered, you've officially stabilized Bitter Springs slightly as a camp and earned some more NCR fame for your effort. When Veronica agrees to join us, she also divulges her association with the Brotherhood, just in case it's a problem for the player. Having never met the Brotherhood and only having a passing understanding of them, it doesn't seem like a problem to bring her along. Activating Veronica's side quest is one of the easier to do at this point. Veronica wants to see the world, to get a broader perspective outside of what she is taught in the Brotherhood. In order to achieve this, there's various areas to explore and people to talk to that will trigger a reaction from Veronica. The player must trigger 3 of these reactions in order for Veronica to want to return to the Brotherhood, so she can attempt to convince the Elder there that the Brotherhood will die out without intervention. Coincidentally, one of these triggers is at Helios 1, and we can use this as an opportunity to return there and talk to Ignacio about Archimedes. Eddie's trigger requires a 5-day cooldown, so now is the perfect time to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and get the second audio log out of him through your dialogue with Ignacio. After the second audio log from Eddie, you have to wait a 3-day period in order for someone to contact you through Eddie's transmission system. Unfortunately, it's one way, so you can't communicate back, but Brotherhood Knight Lorenzo manages to get through to you and asks you to bring Eddie to a nearby patrol so that they can examine him as his technology interests them. During an earlier gameplay segment with RepCon headquarters, I actually already ran into a Brotherhood patrol that had been murdered, which speeds up the process of the questline and immediately directs you towards the Brotherhood base at Hidden Valley. However, as you near there, another individual gets in contact with you from the followers of the Apocalypse. They understand that the Brotherhood is interested in the tech, but they wish to study it so that the technology may be available for all. The followers are essentially the major contrast to the Brotherhood when it comes to technology. The Brotherhood wants to hoard all old world technology because they believe it to be a danger to civilization.
Yeah, totally.
They believe they have a duty to protect the outside world from old
No,
world
we're
tech
just
while
watching.
preserving it.
We're
But this gets
watching
warped in a variety of ways depending on the chapter
New
and
Vegas,
who is leading
the
said
big
chapter
Fallout
at
New
the
Vegas
time. The
retrospective.
followers, on the other hand,
I wanted to
preach a
play
different
something in the
ideology.
background,
They
right,
look
while
to
editing.
explore the various technologies
I
of the old
don't
world
really
and
hear
new
it.
while
It's
keeping
kind of
it
like
free for
really low
all,
for me
meaning out
right
of
now.
the hands of powerful groups
But
like the Brotherhood or even the
I was like,
NCR.
oh,
Take
let's see what
Ignacio, for example, who worried
Kyle
about a super weapon potentially
uploaded,
getting in the
and
hands
it's
of
like
the
a
NCR,
7
and would
hour.
rather see the power plant
It's a
used for
7-hour
wide-reaching
video.
energy for everyone. The followers
It's not even
generally
like
want to
a.
utilize
It's not even
technology for
like a
civilization
mashup
as
of a bunch of
whole.
other
The
videos. No,
NCR
it's
wants to
one
utilize
big
technology for
7-hour
weapons
long
and
video.
defense, and the Brotherhood wants to keep it all for themselves for fear of what civilization could do with
produced.
it. We'll head to Hidden Valley soon, as it will allow us to continue Veronica's questline and ultimately learn
Because
more
I
about
thought
her
at first
and
I thought it was
Brotherhood,
like
but before that, there's one major quest
one
to
of his
take
like
care of within
his
McAllen.
3-hour
Thomas Hildern is
his
the
3-hour
director of
Monster Hunter
OSI,
history
or
is
the
like a
Office
mashup
Science
of
and
all of his
Industry.
other
When you
videos. But
approach
no,
him,
this
he
is
assumes you're there for a
one
job he's
big
hiring
long
for, and you can
7-hour
lie or tell him
video.
the
That's
truth about why
nuts.
you've run into him. Either way, Thomas can explain his needs for a mercenary to head to Vault
kind of just
22,
have it in the
a vault
background.
overgrown with plant life due to a
I do
scientific
also want to play the
study and
game,
experiment that
so
took place there.
not
He needs the data
not
of
paying
said study in order
a
to
lot of
reproduce or
attention, but
research
it's
the results
interesting
for the
stuff.
future of the Mojave or of the world in general. At least that's how he puts it. Really,
No,
Hildern
we're
just
editing.
seems
We're
like
editing
someone trying to
another
capitalize on an opportunity to advance his own career.
Isaiah
However,
Thoughts
even with such selfish
episode
intentions, the
talking
possible
about
good that comes
V-Rising.
out of it seems hard to pass up. You can agree to take the job, but on your way out, you're stopped by Angela Williams, also of the OSI. She explains that multiple individuals have been hired to head to Vault 22 and none have come back. Most recently, a ghoul by the name of Keeley was sent and also hasn't come back. Angela is
when I
worried
have
about
the,
Keeley and asks you to find out more about her
premiere
status, which is an
playback,
optional aspect of the quest line, but
everything
very
just
important.
freezes.
This is a good time to mention the concept of vaults. Vaults are a key component within the setting and lore of Fallout's universe. They were advertised by the Vault-Tec Corporation as a set of bunkers that civilians could use as shelters should a nuclear war take place. There's a big history involving Vault-Tec and their mismanagement and corruption in the creation of the vaults themselves, but the biggest factor of them is how the majority of the vaults were designed with some sort of experiment in mind. Sometimes an experiment on a concept or on the inhabitants themselves. In this way, almost every vault is unique in comparison to the last. Take Vault 22 as an example. We are traveling there due to experiments on agriculture so that we can get the data surrounding it.
Is there
Meanwhile, a
7
vault
hours?
like
Yeah,
11, which we will
totally.
visit during the Brotherhood questline, is more a
I
psychological
have
experiment
one.
on the
I'm
individuals
working on
living
one that
within.
might be
There's many
over
vaults in
maybe
New Vegas
20
and the
minutes at
series in
least.
general.
I think my
all with
first
some
one was
sort of
like over 20
catastrophic failure
minutes.
that led to the death and suffering
Because I
of
played
their
through a bunch of
inhabitants. I
demos
won't be going over
during
every
the
vault in
Steam
New Vegas,
summer.
but instead the ones that
Well,
are
not a
more
bunch. I
relevant
played
to
through
the
like
quests
5
at hand.
specific
However, the ones
demos
we
during
do
the
explore, I believe to be not
Steam
only
Next Fest,
interesting from
and
a
yo,
lore
there's some
perspective,
really
but
good
sometimes
ones. I'm
incredibly
like, man,
mechanically interesting as well.
these are
Approaching Vault
already
22
great
is a bit
games, and they're
imposing.
not
For
even
one,
out
you have
yet.
to
I
make
want
your
to
way
buy
through
them.
several cazadores again, only to be met with a cliffside covered in green vegetation. Typically, this would be a wonderful sight to see. Even Fallout 3 had a similar area where life was once again thriving in the nuclear wasteland. New Vegas likes to use environmental storytelling this way to convey how the actions of an area have affected its surroundings. Sometimes these are creative ways, such as the grass leading up to Vault 22, with several orchid mantises attacking you on your way in. Sometimes it's more on the nose, like within the same area having a sign that says "Stay out, the plants kill." It's hit
How long
or
did it
miss
take to
depending
render
on the
7? I have
location.
no
Still,
idea.
I think Vault 22 is one of the more unique vaults
And I hope
out there,
he
consisting of 5
rendered it.
levels, all of which are not only covered in
I
vegetation,
hope he. I was
but
like, I
also
wonder,
home
did he have to
hostile
also
plant-like humanoids that come out of the vegetation to attack you? Players
turn
can
them
make
into
their way down the
proxies?
vault via the staircase,
Because my
or
Premiere, I have to
bypass
turn
the
everything into
majority of the
proxies
location
now.
by
Because
repairing the
MP4s are just
elevator.
way
For the
too
sake of
slow.
exploration, we'll take the stairs, although
don't
I
wanna
fixed the
know.
elevator anyway for use later. there. The data you're looking for is on level 5, the deepest
Like,
point of the vault, and
the,
getting there the normal way is no small feat, as you'll have to
was
work
it?
through countless enemies on
Well,
the
he
there.
doesn't
The
stream it,
bottom
so he doesn't
level,
have
pest
to
control
down
is blocked
record
off via the
everything,
staircases
so
as
that's
well.
fine.
The only way through
I remember
is
my
via a cave tunnel
Daggerfall,
that
like
connects
the
to
first
the
Day
lower
of Thoughts
levels,
video,
and
where
the
I
only
talk
way to
about
get through there
Daggerfall
is
is
with
one
an ID
part.
card you find in the living
I had to
quarters.
download a
While
6-hour
exploring all of the
VOD,
facilities
and
of Vault
then
22, you can find various
and then I realized,
terminals
oh,
that Keely
Premiere's
has been
Premiere's way
using to
too
keep
slow for this.
observations of the
Let's turn it
surroundings. In fact,
into a
once we have the
proxy. Let's
data,
make
you can
a
head further into the tunnels attached to the
ProRes
vault to find an
422
incredibly
proxy,
open cavern
so
full of
Premiere can
hostiles,
actually
from
read it
orchid
faster.
mantises to giant Venus
It turns that,
flytraps.
like,
Once dealt with, you can find
6
Keely in an
hours
indent
from,
off to the side
I'd
of the
say,
cavern. She'll remark on how it took us long enough to get there, and
10
you can
or
explain
so
to her that you were
gigs
sent
to
there
like
by
80
teleporter,
gigs.
but were only asked to look for Keely thanks
I
to
was like,
Angela,
oh,
which she is
that's a big
appreciative of.
file.
Keely heads back to the upper levels of the vault, where she explains that spores are being produced, which are poisonous to humans, and if they don't stop them, they
It's
will
fast.
take over
It's
the
fast
Mojave.
to
Her plan is
turn
gas
into
the source
proxies,
and
but
ignite
it's like
them
I
in order
delete
to
it
clear the
immediately after I'm
facility.
done
The only
rendering
issue
the
is that
video.
this
I'm
needs to
like,
be done
I don't
at
need
the
this file
source, meaning
anymore.
you need to
Delete
go
it.
down there to cause an
I'll
explosion
keep
that will
the
ignite
main
entire
MP4,
level
but
of
the proxy
vault
I'll
while
delete.
also surviving. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to throw a grenade near the vent that is producing the gas and
This
quickly close a nearby door to prevent the
V-Rising
blast from
VOD
reaching you.
is
Unfortunately, your companions may not make it in time, leading to them comically going unconscious temporarily. Once
also to make
successful,
things
you can
faster.
return to
I don't even
Keely,
use
who
the Twitch
mentions she
Leader
will
anymore. I
delete
don't
the data
download
on
it
the
from
computer
Twitch.
in order to make sure
I'll
no one
upload
can
it to
cause this
YouTube, then download
situation
it
to
from
happen
YouTube.
again. However, since we have taken the data already, Keely notices that it has
I
been
could
accessed
record
very
it, but
recently
I
and questions you
prefer I'll
on the
just download
subject.
the
You
VOD.
can lie to her, but ultimately telling her the truth is
Mainly
generally
because
the
I
best
don't know
option,
why.
in my opinion.
They're both
Initially, she will
MP4
ask you
files,
for
but
the
I guess
data, which you can
YouTube
refuse and
compresses
have
it
lead
fat
to some
more, I guess,
hostilities.
yeah.
But a science check
Even
of around
with a
70 will
proxy,
allow you
with
to
Twitch
convince her that
VOD,
the failures of
it's
this experiment are as useful as
they
the
recorded.
experiment
Nah,
themselves,
it's all
and will allow
VODs.
scientists to make sure that they don't produce the same mistakes moving forward. With the data at hand and Keely convinced, she'll unlock the doors of the vault and allow you to exit. When you return to McCarran, Angela will inform you that Keely called Hildern and laid into him about the dangers of the vault and his own incompetence. You can then deliver the data to Hildern in order to complete the quest
V-Rising.
while
Let me
warning
see how
him
long
of its
this is.
dangers, to which he ironically says, "We're
V-Rising
the government.
MP4
Have a little
video
faith in us,"
file.
as if they didn't cause the near extinction
And
of
with
humanity
the,
already. With the major events of Camp McCarran
YouTube
dealt with, we
download,
can turn our sights on Hidden Valley to deal with both the Brotherhood
YouTube
and
DLG
Veronica's
app I
quest line.
use
Hidden
that
Valley is
doesn't
exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunker hidden within a
limit
fenced-off valley
that
that can
doesn't
be covered
throttle
in
your
an artificial
downloads. It's
sandstorm
really
to deter
fast to download
scavengers or
YouTube
anyone from
videos.
approaching. There's various reasons you could end up here, from Eddie or Veronica to actions within the strip, or just random exploring. And how you
V-Rising
manage
is
to
around
approach
3
will
hours.
affect your first
The
interaction
proxy
with the
is,
Brotherhood as a
let's see how
whole.
big.
While not shown here,
50
entering the
gigs.
bunker without Veronica and attempting to
DLG is
contact
great.
the inhabitants within will ultimately lead to you being trapped inside and met with a series
The
of
one,
paladins with
the
weapons
one I was using
drawn. You still
before
get to
wasn't
enter the
good
bunker
because
after some dialogue, but it's not a
I
particularly
need to get
welcoming
an
greeting.
updated
On the flip side,
version
bringing
that
Veronica
uses
allows her to
a
contact the guard within and gain access
different
hassle-free. This will allow most to
thing
remark on
called
the fact that
YouTube
Veronica brought you
DLP,
here,
which
with even the elder mentioning how
does
you are
not
ultimately
throttle
her
your download.
responsibility. There's a lot to do within the bunker as an outsider. You gain certain liberties that
Other
the
than that,
actual
yeah.
members of the Brotherhood
Proxy
do not
is 50
have,
gigs,
such as the
so
ability
it went
to
from
walk freely in and out as you please. The bunker is in a state of lockdown.
It went
meaning only
from
very
5
particular
gigs
members like
YouTube
Veronica and
download
scouts within the
to
evening
50.
are allowed to head outside, only to make sure that the bunker continues to function.
I
This is
deleted
for a
Red Acre
variety of
anyways.
reasons, mostly because Elder McNamara fears for the survival of his chapter due to their failure to hold Helios 1 from the NCR, as well as the losses they suffered while attempting to do so. What's interesting about this is Veronica's main struggle in her quest line, where she sees the trajectory of this lockdown and the Brotherhood's values leading to their ultimate demise, as they refuse to leave and refuse to interact with any of the actually active settlements within the wasteland.
we're talking about
that may not
V-Rising.
be thriving,
It
but
does
are
suck.
at least managing.
I wish I knew
Veronica's
beforehand
problems are with
that
the values
my
of the
character doesn't
Brotherhood as a whole, but her
transfer
main
between
conflict
servers
is
and
with
local
Elder
save.
McNamara, who
Like, I
refuses
don't
to
even
lift
think the game
lockdown,
tells
which
you.
will ultimately kill off the
I think I'm just
Brotherhood.
used to like how Terraria does it, where you can just bring your character wherever.
Yeah?
After
But
an
it also
initial
makes
visit,
sense
Veronica
considering
tries
it's
to
not a
convince him to
procedurally
change their
generated
ways,
world.
which he
It's always
ultimately
the
shuts
same
her
map.
down on. Still, Veronica feels McNamara's
And
heart is
I
in the
didn't
right
realize
place, and they
how
ultimately
much
need
crafting there
convincing
was
show
to the
potential
game.
of them opening their doors.
I thought it was
This
just
is
like
where
Path
Elder
of
Elijah
Exile,
comes
just a
in.
simple
Elijah ran the chapter
MMORPG.
before McNamara in Helios 1. McNamara only took over after Elijah disappeared and the Brotherhood ultimately had to retreat from the NCR. Elijah was different from your typical Brotherhood elder. His interest in old world tech wasn't in its procurement and preservation, but instead in the function of old world weapons specifically, to the point that he was obsessed with Helios 1's potential. I know we haven't actually seen the potential firsthand yet, but we will get to it, I assure you. Elijah is a man with a mission, one that tends to ruin him mentally as he hyper-focuses on finding ultimate power within the Mojave Wasteland. This ultimately culminates in a meeting with him in the game's first DLC, Dead Money, and your interaction with him sheds a better light on his ideology, his mental state, and his relationship with Veronica after the fact. The reason I even bring him up at this time is because Veronica was very close to Elijah, to the point she knows of a secret shack where they can find his research on various advanced technologies across the Mojave Wasteland.
Hey man,
As you
got to
exit the
go.
audience
Alright, sounds
chamber,
good.
you're met with a set of paladin zealots who don't
Yeah,
like that
avoid
Veronica
playing when
is
you were
both
tired.
questioning
Dude,
the
no, it's all
elder
about
and
playing
seems to be
Truck Sim when
actively
you're
trying to
tired.
persuade him to turn from the teachings
Good
of
luck,
the
thank
Brotherhood.
you,
They
thank you.
ultimately
Have
leave
a
you
good
alone for the
night.
time, but
I
not
need to
without
make
threatening
dinner.
you should you
The heck?
continue on your path with
Gotta do
Veronica.
that.
One of these
We go
involves the
and
vegetation technology we found in Vault
come back
22,
after
meaning
Din
we
Din.
already have the ability to continue the questline and present the
Have a
technology
good
to
night.
McNamara, making a plea for
Bye-bye.
him based on the advantages of making the Brotherhood self-sufficient so
Actually,
they
I'm gonna
don't
make
die
dinner now.
out. Other technology you could
BRB.
find include a pulse gun that deals
Bye.